for October 17th, 2022 is called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen,
Here.
Councilmember Coombs, Councilmember Gardner,
Here.
Councilmember Jurinski, Councilmember Lawson,
Here.
Councilmember Marcano,
Present.
Councilmember Medina,
Here.
Councilmember Mario,
Present.
Councilmember Senberg,
Here.
and Councilmember Zavanik.
Here.
There's a quorum.
Well, I'm not sure what's going on with my camera here. Okay,
Mayor, check your camera options. You might have it set to the wrong camera since those laptops have two cameras.
okay. Where do you do that at?
Where it says stop video at the bottom on WebEx, click that down arrow and then switch your camera device.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. These young people. Okay. Um, Staff is requesting that we take, to take 2A, I'm sorry, 2E off the consent calendar. So, is there any objection to moving item number 2A, 2B, and 2C, 2A through 2C, and 2E, I'm sorry, 2A through 2D, and 2F through 2K forward? Is there any objection? Seeing none, those items will move forward. Brief staff presentation on item number 2E.
Mayor. That's.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay, is there a presentation by staff?
Yes, sir. This
Um,
is Carol Toth,
Okay.
the manager of
You know
accounting.
what? I'm sorry, Carol. Let's go. Okay, that's fine. Please proceed. There was no objection, so the other items move forward. And so now we're considering item number 2E. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we were approving the resolutions for the 2023 Business Improvement District operating plans and budgets, which you just did for 9 of the 10. We separated out the Tower Business Improvement District, whose 2023 budget consists of $50,000 primarily from developer advances. And that was the plan and budget that was presented to M&F on September the 27th and is in your packets tonight. We have become aware from the Tower Business Improvement District representative that the board will consider a 2.5 mill levy increase or 2.5 mill levy in the budget when they meet to adopt it in November. This will reduce the amount of developer advances that were in the original document that's in your packet tonight and replace it with the mill levy. There is no plans for any other development or operational perspective changes. And we do have the Tower Business Improvement District representative on the call tonight if you have any questions for Spencer Fain about that. And what we would do is revise the budget when it would go forward to the regular council meeting on November the 14th.
Questions on number 2E?
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to just deduct the 50,000 since that's going to be covered in the mill levy, and the mill levy would require an election, I guess, of residents.
I think it's already in their setup that they can impose up to 50 mills. Nicole, is that correct?
Yes, Carol, that is correct. The district has already held its election to have the ability to impose a mill levy and
Okay.
up to 50 mills.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Is there objection to moving 2E forward? I think then 2E will move forward. I think I forgot to include 2J and 2K in the motion. So is there objection to moving 2J and 2K forward? And 2J, 2K, and 2K will move forward. Item number 3A, 2023 state and federal priorities. Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. As the chair of the Federal, State, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee, every year the committee reviews the state priorities that we have so that we could actually provide some guidance to our state and federal lobbyists on priorities that the city wants to pursue. Before you in the packet is the state and federal priorities that went through the Pfizer committee. We did ask for feedback. We did get some feedback from Councilmember Zavanek. So I would like to, I'm going to move this forward to Roberto to go through those priorities for discussion so we can get this finalized. Roberto?
Mayor and Council, good evening. Roberto Venegas, Deputy City Manager. I will be brief. As Councilmember Lawson indicated, you have both the state and federal priorities in your packet. Those items move through the Pfizer committee. They are start with department recommendations for priorities, incorporating council feedback, particularly the FSIR committee on edits and revisions to those priorities. Many of these will look familiar. Some of them are multi-year and longstanding priorities like support of the Buckley Air Force Base, et cetera. So you'll see some of those that are familiar. So rather than go individually through all of them, I have included in your packets the additions and revisions that Councilmember Zavanek has proposed. Those are primarily in the affordable housing area and the public safety area. And so what I would propose is that we essentially look at those, and if Councilmember Zavanek would like to speak to those changes, and then perhaps the mayor and the council can take a read of the council if they want to approve those or take some of those or remove some of those out, and then staff can move forward with direction with those priorities. So Councilmember Zavanek, I'm not sure if you want to go through, I'm happy to go through your revisions, but I thought maybe you'd like to speak to them in both the affordable housing and the public safety area.
Councilmember Zavanek.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to do that. I'll start with affordable housing. A lot of it, I just, you'll notice in the revised comments, I struck through things that I didn't think were necessary or that were as critical to actually reducing the cost of housing. The big one that I added was construction defect reform. This is something that Colorado's, it's been a challenge for our state for a long time, where builders are reluctant to actually build a density or multifamily units for sale as a result of our pretty lenient construction defect laws. The other part, and I don't know why, I was just looking at this, Roberto, and this might have been an error on my end, and so I want to strike this strike, which is the funding accountability. I don't remember cutting that whole piece out. I think it should stay, the funding accountability portion of the affordable housing. But everything else you can see I struck. And in the grant opportunities for the Navigation Center, I struck out the permanent supportive housing, in part because we have, as a part of our city's overall plan for homelessness, we just funded through Aurora Mental Health an expansion of permanent supportive housing on that campus. I don't believe that it necessarily needs to be a part of the new Navigation Center if we move forward with some sort of a grant request or proposal to the state. In the area that we've been discussing. On the next section on the behavioral health, I had put in there a reform on the Colorado Community Mental Health Centers. I didn't put anything in specific in there, in part because of, frankly, just time. But there was a lot of conversations as a result of the governor's task force on mental health. And one of the big takeaways from that was making sure that the dollars that are flowing through our community mental health centers are actually getting to, particularly to some of our younger populations, to our youth populations, but overall just having more transparency in those dollars, because it is a significant amount of money that has come from state and from the federal government through our community mental health centers. So making sure that the recommendations that came out of the governor's task force on mental health are put into place, particularly around that. As our partner, of course, is Aurora Mental Health. And again, just making sure that those dollars are being leveraged and maximized. The big chunk of changes that I made, and there were a number of them, was around public safety. And as we've discussed over the course of the past year, this is a foundational issue for us as a city, whether it comes to, as the mayor mentioned in his State of the City, from an economic development standpoint, public safety is critical. It's an issue that our residents all talk to us about in a number of different ways. So the recommendations that I added in here, some of them, frankly, have been talked about by now candidates for the state legislature or candidates for governor, including the governor himself. So the first one is on motor vehicle theft. There was a law that passed that was referred to as misdemeanor reform, and essentially put cars that were under a certain value, made it a misdemeanor to steal them. We've seen the incredible impact of motor vehicle theft in our city. It's not unique to Aurora. It's impacting the entire state. I think the things that we have done, the ordinance that we passed, and the effort that the Aurora Police Department has, or the emphasis that the Aurora Police Department has put on motor vehicle theft, is having an impact. But I believe that there's a bigger solution needed, a statewide solution. Specifically, and this is something that I've heard Governor Polis now supports, and it's the idea that we should be agnostic to the value of car theft, because frankly, the cars that are lower in value, the impact to those people who have their cars stolen is frankly higher. A lot of times it's their only car. So having going back and reforming our motor vehicle theft laws at a state level so that we don't have this patchwork approach, I think is important. Same thing, the possession of weapons by previous offenders or POW. We did a IGA with the U.S. Attorney's Office because as a result of, again, state legislation that made it more permissive, this is a hard one for me to believe, but previous felons who are caught and particularly with its motor vehicle theft and selling drugs, they're allowed to carry guns. Not a good idea. These are exactly the types of people that we don't want to be able to have firearms, but state law makes it more permissive. Fortunately, it's still a federal offense, which is why our IGA with the U.S. Attorney's Office, we also tried to do an IGA with the DA's office so we could have a second prosecutor that would handle these cases when they were brought forward in Aurora. But frankly, we shouldn't have to do that. Cities shouldn't have to have an IGA with a federal prosecutor in order to go after previous possession of weapons by previous offenders, especially those who are committing motor vehicle theft and selling drugs. And then the next two are somewhat linked in parole reform and PR bond reform. We hear this all too often. We hear it from our own chief of police, a lot of people in law enforcement. It isn't necessarily that more people are committing crimes. It's that the same people are committing more crime because we have this revolving door with personal recognizant bonds that are allowing people to commit crimes, and on a pinky promise, they're being let go, and they go out and they reoffend. And in fact, we've seen that even with some of the juveniles in our city who are committing crimes and violent crimes, and they're out on a PR bond and not being held in jail. And so I think the state needs to have a hard look at parole reform and PR bond reform in order to hold people who are habitual criminals and violent criminals in a way that helps to ensure better safety in our communities. And then the final one in this area is fentanyl. There was some conversations around fentanyl this last legislative session. 2 years ago, the legislature decriminalized possession of fentanyl, which is unbelievable. And this past session, they tried to tighten it up somewhat. But the fact of the matter is that this is a dangerous poison. This isn't like any other drug that we've seen. These synthetic opioids are killing people. And we should have stricter penalties for any possession of fentanyl. And I hope that the legislature, and I believe actually that they will. I mean, we lead the country in the increase in fentanyl deaths in Colorado. And I think that our elected officials at the state level are starting to recognize the unintended consequences of their more permissive drug laws. And I actually think it's contributing to our homeless challenges. but it's certainly taking far too many lives of our residents. So those are the changes that I made. I'm happy to answer any questions. I didn't get a chance to go through the federal priorities as closely as I would like to, but those were my suggestions on the state side.
Questions for Councilmember Zavon?
Mayor?
Sorry, Councilmember Lawson? Council, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Yeah, on the mental health, so you mentioned we added the $7 million to the Aurora Mental Health Campus. And then you mentioned the governor's task force. So we would just basically wait to see what happens, I guess, on that task force in determining any further needs?
Yeah, so Mayor.
Please proceed.
Yeah, sorry. So on the reform for the mental health community centers, again, that's when I would be happy to build out more with Councilmember Lawson and Angela. But there were a number of reforms that were suggested from that task force and related directly at the Colorado Community Mental Health Centers. And this is a conversation that I know that even Councilmember Gardner has had about, the lack of available resources for kids who are experiencing mental health issues. There's been talks about whether or not local government should raise taxes to meet those needs. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of money in the system. It's just a matter of getting it through it and to the end users. And so the governor's task force, including, I believe it already includes creating a department. So I would say we look through that as we go into this next session and identify, because I think that when we talk about behavioral health, there might be nothing more important from our community's perspective than supporting those reforms moving forward.
Mayor?
I think that what the governor commission was essentially looking at, I think, were more what the reimbursement fee structure was for mental health services. The issue about the new campus involves the one-time ARPA dollars, and so I think those are really two separate issues.
Mayor, just follow up on my. Yeah, and I think I remember the governor talking about duplication of services, and that was one issue that we want to make sure, and I think it was brought up actually by myself when we were in DC, was to make sure that because there's so much money coming in on the mental health that we, I think I asked this actually to Senator Bennett, that we make sure that we don't duplicate services, that we're working together in collaboration, counties and state and so forth. So I think that was part of also just making sure that we spend monies wisely. I did respond to the email that was sent out, and I agreed with Councilmember Zavonic's proposal.
Mayor.
Councilmember Lawson.
Yeah, Councilmember Zavonic, thank you for your recommendation. So I'm just going to tackle the first two, and then I'll let other colleagues speak before I get into the other one. I don't agree with you on the strikeouts for preserving affordability, all of that, because people are getting evicted. We need some protections. We need to have increased rental assistance. I mean, people are struggling from mid-level to even our older populations. So I do not agree with striking that out. I do agree with you doing the construction defect. I remember that I actually testified on that from many years ago in 2017. The mobile home protections as well. I mean, we have 12 mobile home parks in the city of Aurora. And there is they have to, and we can just address that issue in general. You weren't on council, but there definitely needs to be some protections for those individuals who live in those particular type of housing. So I'm not going to support striking out all of that and not having those kind of protections just because of what we're dealing with in our city. As far as the behavioral health one, I think that that's kind of broad. So if you want to if we need to add something to that, and especially when it's coming to the youth and things like that based on the governor's task force, but we do need to put something in there because what you have now is broad. So I'm going to let other council members speak to maybe the first two if they want to go into public safety, but I'll go on to that one after.
So let me break it into three different areas.
Or it may be good to tackle one topic at a time and then.
So we
kind
have,
of go
I
back.
think there's three categorical areas that were brought up. The behavioral health, recommendations from the governor's task force on behavioral health, housing, and criminal justice.
Right, but Mayor, we might want to tackle each one separately, because we have three different sections. So maybe we should start on the affordable housing first.
Okay, Councilmember Zwanek, then why don't you go over each issue separately, and then we'll decide whether to move it forward or not.
Yeah, so the first one is the affordable housing, and as Councilmember Lawson, I strike those two, and I respect that you disagree with my striking of those. It adds the construction defects, and then the final one, and this is where I think there was a little bit of blurring between the behavioral health and the affordable housing. Was in the affordable housing, there's the grant opportunities for navigation center. And I struck the permanent supportive housing because of the one-time ARPA dollars being used to fund permanent supportive housing already at the Aurora Mental Health Campus.
Let's do each issue, not
Yeah,
category.
no, this is separate.
So let's do the first issue.
Mayor,
What was the first issue you raised again? On affordable housing?
Adding construction defect reform.
Okay, so let's discuss that then. Is there questions or comments on construction defects?
yeah, Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. So this is an issue I followed very closely, especially with my background in the AEC industry. I've spoken with designers, architects, builders, and from a lot of their perspective, the issue here seems to see with folks who are interested in cutting corners as opposed to following the spec book, and then they get sued when they build shoddy properties. So my concern with this ongoing narrative is that we're ultimately building up towards undermining consumer protections, especially on a product like a home. And that does not sit well with me. So without great specificity in terms of what we're looking for here, there's no way I will support that.
Okay. Further discussion. I just want to say, I think it's, Councilmember Maria.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You can say your comments and I can speak afterwards.
Well, I think the system's so out of balance that it's frozen out that entry level multifamily homeowner occupied product, and so it's created a real distortion in housing, and so I rise in support of it. Councilmember Maria.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that with just recalling conversations we've had, we had residents speak. I don't recall which particular project it was, but folks who were in like a long-term battle around consumer protections with their I think it was a condo property. So I think I would echo the sentiments around I'm not willing to I guess release any create any more or less consumer protections. And I guess there's nothing specific in here that isn't clarifying or isn't assuring that, you know, we're not pursuing construction defect reform with foregoing consumer protection. So I wouldn't support that either.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I just want to give y'all some examples. So I'm the first tenant of the apartment that I rent. And if this were a condo, I would have absolutely sued for construction defects. The electrical here is shoddy. The circuiting is done in a way that makes absolutely no sense. And I have designed electrical circuits in my professional life before running for office. The studs are 24 inches-ish on center as opposed to 16 inches. That it's an inferior quality of sound insulation, but it also makes it difficult to hang things on the wall, as y'all might imagine. And those are just two simple examples. I have neighbors who have horrible insulation, whose doors or windows have never properly closed, and I can go on. So to me, the issue here is basically follow your spec book, make sure that you hire high quality workers, you know, perhaps support folks in the skilled trades where they're actually licensed and bonded, and don't cut corners and you won't get sued. I don't buy the excuse that, you know, it's because of our existing laws that they don't build for purchase multifamily properties. I think it's because it's frankly far more profitable for them to just build rentals. They get to make long-term profits off of the tenants, or if they're merchant builders, they just basically put up the product really quickly, sell it on the open market, and they don't give a darn what the quality of the product that was built is. They just wanted to turn around and make their money on the market. So I would look at, regulation that would discourage folks from doing what I just described, as opposed to further weakening consumer protections. I don't think it's the right thing to do for the residents of our city or for our state.
Mayor.
Councilmember Bonnie.
Yeah, so one, you can have construction defect reform without compromising consumer protection. And I don't doubt that there are stories of builders that cut corners and do shoddy work, and they should be held accountable. But I also know that there are predatory attorneys out there that go out and look for opportunities where there will be a defect in an individual unit and sue on a class action basis in order to get profit. And they tie up the ability for those people to move out of their homes. This has actually happened to me personally, where you can't then sell your home. But construction defect reform can balance consumer protection and ensuring that predatory attorney practices aren't used in order to go after home builders for something that might be an isolated incident as opposed to something that's shoddy across the entire development. We do have, as the mayor pointed out, an imbalance where we don't have a whole lot of those entry-level condos or townhomes for sale because, and if you go and actually talk to builders, and not just any and every builder, you can talk to reputable quality builders in our community across our state, and they will tell you that they have planned units that they would have done as for sale, but because of our construction defect laws, they won't, and they turn them into rentals.
Mayor
I'm sorry.
Bergen.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Is there any way we could delay this? I feel like we're going to get way into the weeds, and maybe we need to, but would it be possible to delay it to another study session to give time? I don't know if everybody turned in recommendations or if it was just one person.
I agree that it ought to be delayed to the next study session. And I don't think this is particularly time sensitive right now. And so, is there any objection to moving this to the next study session?
Mayor, I just want to just say something. I gave everybody an opportunity and to actually give their comments. And now, because this one's a topic that everybody we want to delay it. The legislative session is in 3 months. So if we're going to move this, we better move it. And if people are going to respond, please do respond. And not, I'm not talking to you about you, Mayor Pro Tem. I see your head going. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about everybody else. We gave a time frame, so respond. And then, but keep delaying and delaying. We're 3 months into the legislative session. Our lobbyists need to know what we're going to be advocating for. So I would just ask if we're going to delay this one, we are putting a time limit, and we're going to have to make this decision the next study session because we don't have very much time.
Further discussion. Is there any objection to moving it to the next study session? Very well. 3A will move to the next study session. 3B, Fourth Amendment to 22nd outfall to Westerly Creek Improvement Plan. Councilmember Sundberg.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to defer to staff on this.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Sundberg, and thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Shavin Yarenda, and I'm the Planning Services Manager in Aurora Water Planning and Engineering. So what we have before you is this Fourth Amendment for this project. First, I'll talk about the project a little bit. The project is really a combination of two projects. One is improvements to the 22nd Avenue outfall, and the other is a water quality pond. And the project area is north of Montview on Westerly Creek. So this is around the Stanley Marketplace. So if we go on to the next slide. Oh, okay. This describes the project area, and then one last thing I'd like to add concerning the project is that this reach of Westerly Creek is the last unimproved segment along Westerly Creek. So if we go to the next slide. So what we're looking to do is expand increase the capacity of that 22nd Avenue stormwater outfall. And then we're looking to improve the health of the creek by introducing some sinuosity and then a water quality pond in that area where I show water quality. So when we realign the creek, what's going to happen is that we'll move some properties out of the floodway. So that's an additional benefit. And with the increased capacity of the 22nd storm sewer, this will decrease the localized flooding in that area. So if we go on to the next slide. There's also another additional benefit with regards to open space with regards to pros, and this is connecting the regional trail that's over there with more access to the Stanley Marketplace. So this will be a great public amenity that this project will also do. Then if we go on to the next slide. Now, there's also another benefit to the developer in this area in that because we are moving the floodplain kind of away from the Stanley, so it's creating more developable area and increased amenity for an open space corridor over there and a reduced floodplain. So you can see that this project has benefits of water quality, increased access to Stanley via the trails, and we also have improved floodplain, and we actually decrease the floodplain and increase more developable land in this area. So if we go on to the next slide. So with this amendment in your packet, Aurora is going to increase its funding to the project is proposing to increase its funding by 1 million. The district is chipping in an extra 375,000. The total cost, the total savings for this project right now is approximately 5 million. However, the total estimated cost for the project is about 12 million. Now, I would like to highlight the fact that Aurora Water is only paying and contributing funds to floodplain improvements and water quality improvements. Then the rest of the funding is going to come from the developer, some GOCO grants, and the district. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions for me?
Mayor,
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I used to be on the water committee for years, and I know that it's come to us with all the different amendments over and over. When you say that then the developer will also have some responsibility, do we know how much that would be?
We do not know at this time, but we're in talks with them, and they fully support the project because of the advantages that it gives them. So we don't know at this time.
And then second, I think it said in the backup that there could be additional costs in the future. Why would that be?
Oh, meaning that right now our savings, because this is done in conjunction with the district, so we're contributing funds towards that 12 million. Right now we're at 5 million approximately. So that the future is closing the gap between the 5 to the 12.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, is any discussion, further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3B forward? Seeing no objection to item number 3B, we'll move forward. Item number 3C, occupational privilege tax repeal. Councilmember Jurenski. Councilmember Jurenski.
Cannot hear you. Click the down arrow next to mute and see if you have the right microphone picked.
You know, I'm going to come back to, without objection, I'm going to come back to 3C. Let's go forward with item number 3D, proposed modifications to moral obligation policy and review of existing moral obligations. Teresa Sedmak, City Treasurer. Wow. Katie, are we having some technical problems here?
No. The WebEx piece is fine.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm not quite certain what is going on with those two audios, but Adrian can reach out and to staff and to Councilmember Jurenski to see what we can do.
Also, Teresa Sedmak, is she here, City Treasurer? Until we get Councilmember Jurenski back on.
Let me check. Yes, she is on.
Okay. Treasurer? I'll tell you what, let's see if we can get these people in. So the time is now 7:06. And I would like to take a standard recess until 7:15. Council is in recess. Council is now back in session. Item number 3D, a proposed modification to moral obligation policy and review of existing moral obligations. Teresa Sedmak, City Treasurer.
Mayor, I'm sorry, are we going to do Councilmember Drinsky's item 3C? I believe that her.
Okay, if she's ready, is she back on?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Councilmember Jersky?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, I'm sorry, Teresa. Let's see. Occupational privilege tax repeal. Councilmember Jersky.
You guys can't hear me.
I can hear you, Councilmember.
Oh, okay. So maybe just the mayor can't hear me. Is Jeff Edwards on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
Okay. Do you want to give your presentation first?
I'd be glad to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to go through a brief presentation on occupational privilege tax along with Greg Hayes. We're just going to go a little bit over the history of the tax, how it's filed, some collections, what the impacts would be fiscally for both the city and businesses. But we'll start with just an overview. This tax was implemented in 1986, and it was designed to help support the costs of employees' impact on street maintenance, police and fire protection, and other city services, and to distribute the tax burden for the city. The tax is a total of $4 per employee per month. It's $2 from the employee and $2 as a match by the employer. The employer portion is exempted for governments and charitable organizations, and employees with multiple employers or multiple jobs in the city are only taxed by their principal employer, so they're not taxed twice per month. The OPT repeal, it differs significantly from some of the other exemptions that we've recently passed for sales and use tax, where the council could easily remove an exemption by ordinance. It would require a voter approval to reenact the OPT. There are only 5 cities in the state that have OPT: Denver, Aurora, Greenwood Village, Glendale, and Sheridan. These are their rates for the employee and the employer portion. Just a quick breakdown on the revenues for OPT. The majority of these revenues come from large corporations and government employees. So, for example, for the top 150 filers by revenue, it's equal to 50% of the total OPT revenues for the city for the whole year. And of those 150 top companies and organizations, 54% are large corporations, 27% government entities, 8% is multi-state companies, 6% charitable organizations, and 5% are Colorado-only companies. Those are companies that have an office solely in Colorado. If the OPT was to be repealed, the average annual employer match, which is the amount that the business pays, the $2 per employee, it would be about $313 for all taxpayers. If we remove the top 150, it would go down to about $209 per year. To file the OPT, we do have a fairly simple form. Depending on how you're filing, this is for example, a quarterly filer. We have quarterly and monthly filing as the only options that we currently offer. And essentially what the filer would do is they would enter the number of employees into each line for the employees that they withheld the tax for. And then they would enter the same number, or if there was one that they didn't have to match for some reason, it would be on the next line. And then this is done on the majority of them are done on our tax portal, and all the math is calculated out automatically for them. Speaking of the filing types, we have 3 different ways an OPT return can be sent to the city. The majority, like I said, is through the tax portal. 41% of them are uploaded by an XML file, which is done mainly through payroll providers. And then about 0.4% come to the city by paper, which is just a little over 250 pieces of paper coming to the city each year. Talk a little bit about what happens when OPT becomes past due. We do try to offer as much education assistance before moving to collection efforts as possible. We do offer opportunities at registration to go through and help them understand their filing requirements and how to file returns. But if it does go to where the return hasn't been filed, we do have notices that go out. The first notice goes out 30 days after the due date. And I do have examples of these, but essentially it's just a reminder saying, hey, we haven't received your return. Please make sure that you file your return. The second notice goes 60 days out after the due date. And that includes some additional language that kind of lays out what options could happen if the city was to enforce their collections, which includes filing a lien, withholding the ability to renew your business license, distraint, and other collection actions. If there's no response from those two notices, then an actual collection case is automatically generated by the city's tax software, and it starts out with personal contact. So we assign these out based off of system within our tax program to prioritize them. But we start with phone calls, just saying, hey, we haven't received your return. Do you need help filing? And kind of take that approach. If we can't get them by phone call, sometimes we send out emails, or we even go and visit the business at their location. If there's no response to those, then we potentially could go towards a lien or a distraint where we potentially seize a business. This is the language of the first notice that's sent out. Like I said, it's mostly just a reminder. Hey, we haven't received your return. Please file it. If you need help, please give us a call. And this is the language in our second notice, which kind of goes through the different abilities that the city has to collect any taxes. Repeal of the OPT is not just a decision that would affect just the city of Aurora. It would affect 9 other entities that receive OPT revenues. For example, in 2021, $590,000 was distributed to other entities, including Fitzsimmons, Aurora Conference Center, Buckingham, and then the CSTP. These are some of the larger items or the larger revenues that were distributed to those entities. And AURA does use these revenues for economic incentive and redevelopment projects. And if it was to be repealed, those existing incentive agreements may need to be updated to reflect that repeal. And this is just the impact of for the businesses and employees. So businesses, 50% of the savings, or about 2.8 million, would go to the top 150 companies and their employees. The remaining companies would save about, like I said, $209 annually. For the employee themselves, it's $24 a year. If we were to look at somebody that earned $30 an hour, it would amount to about 4 minutes per month that they would get back from this tax. On an annual basis, it's an equivalent of 0.04% of their annual wages. And just a little bit of a comparison, we do have a grocery tax exemption, which is fairly significant. The majority of the cities in the state of Colorado do not have this exemption. In fact, 82% of cities in the state of Colorado tax food for home consumption, which is this grocery tax exemption. And just to give you an idea of what that would look like. So if we were to look at the town of Parker, which taxes groceries, their grocery store would essentially report to us 81% of their sales if we tax groceries. Whereas the city of Aurora, we only get about 38% of their sales are subject to tax in the city of Aurora. So it's a significant difference when looking at the amount of money that's generated by a grocery store. This estimated amount of tax for this exemption for the city of Aurora is anywhere between $20 and $54 million in annual sales tax. So it's probably one of our largest exemptions. The town of Parker, they estimated 13 to 20% of their sales taxes from groceries, and the town of Castle Rock estimated 17% of their sales taxes from groceries. This graph on the right is the Denver metro cities and those that tax food for home consumption and those that don't. You'll notice that those that don't include all 5 of those cities that have an OPT. And if you don't have any questions about that, I can turn it over to Greg Hayes, and he'll talk a little bit more about the fiscal impacts.
Other questions at this point?
Mayor Zvonek.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, so 2 questions. One, you talked about the government employees. That I assume that the majority of those are made up of APS and Cherry Creek Public School employees.
You know, there's a large amount that comes from the university. They have a large employee base. But yes, I believe Cherry Creek Schools is in one of those, is one of the top 150. And so is, I believe, APS, Aurora Public Schools, as well.
So teachers, okay. And then the other thing is, I'm trying to understand the grocery tax exemption. That seemed like it was a total non sequitur for this presentation. I understand that those the 5 had it, but there were others that didn't. There's 400 municipalities in Colorado. 5 of them have OPT, and it just happens to be that 5 of them are in that list that also exempt it. I'm trying to understand the connection between the 2.
Sure, and Greg is actually going to go into a little bit more detail and kind of connect the dots on why the 5 that exempt groceries also have an OPT. So hopefully that will answer your question, Councilmember Zvonek.
Okay.
If that works.
Yeah, I'm anxious to hear.
Okay, further questions at this point? Mr. Hayes, please proceed.
I'm actually going to ask the question first. In terms of going through the fiscal impacts, what I went through and created some slides based on some of the questions that were asked over the weekend, so at the Saturday workshop, but then also Councilmember Jurenski asked us a really good question about there are cities that have neither an OPT nor tax groceries. How do they do it? And so I looked into some information like that. Would you like me to keep going, or did you want to talk first, or how do you want to play this?
I can just jump in right now. It's just really interesting to me that city staff has put together a presentation against a sitting council member's ordinance. This is not the presentation that was originally presented in the M&F committee. And I just find it really interesting that city staff, who is exempt from this occupational privilege tax, is literally presenting a case to defend a bad tax. So quite frankly, Greg, you can present whatever you want. I'm going to argue you. I'm not going to listen to you. And Jeff Edwards, you didn't even show me that presentation before you decided to share it tonight. So shame on both of you. Shame on city staff. Go ahead, and then I'll continue.
Why are y'all attacking the refs?
All right, now. So Councilman Jurenski, it's your desire to have them continue the presentation then?
Oh, yeah, let's hear it. Go ahead.
Okay, please proceed with the presentation.
All right. So this was talked about on Saturday. The fiscal impact of this in 2024, we're already $3.1 million out of balance, plus the 5.9 is $9 million of an ongoing balancing need. Now, you did make some decisions on that Saturday, which goes against this: the diversity, equity, inclusion manager elimination, oil and gas inspector, and then the entire police monitor program took out about 700,000 of that. The remainder is about $8.3 million. Then there was a question about ongoing and one time. Can we cover it with one time and ongoing? On that Saturday, I sort of butchered it, and so Terry helped me out with this. But we also, during M&F and during that Saturday workshop, we talked about some equivalents. So 8.3 million is the equivalent of 111 City of Aurora employees. So next slide. And 8.3 million is more than the total budget of 11 departments. So it's not a small amount. That's something that we're definitely going to have to work with. Councilmember Jurinsky on the Saturday asked about, well, if we cut OPT, there's got to be some other costs that would automatically go away with this. And so we looked at that. Mailing and paper, about $7,500 would go away with that. The staff time spent on OPT currently would be redirected towards sales and use tax collections that they're already doing. What they've got, like, I think it's 7 people, and Jeff can help me if I'm wrong here, but it's about 1,000 hours is what they estimated, because they don't track specifically, but they estimated across all the revenue agents that are on OPT. A lot of times when people are working on an OPT thing, they're also working on a sales tax thing or a use tax thing, and so it makes it a little bit difficult to call that out. But maybe it's about 1,000 hours across all revenue agents. Next slide. The other fiscal impacts, there was a question about how this was going to work against the mayor was talking about a recession reserve, and when we're looking at about $4 million to get to that 5% that we were talking about on Saturday, if we're trying to balance to $8 million, that extra $4 million, we would have to try to find both, or we couldn't do one or the other, or we couldn't get to the recession reserve. We talked about a diversification goal. Where about 72% of our revenues is sales and use taxes. In the past, we've had wishes to be more diversified, so this would be make us a little bit less diversified, more respondent on the sales and use taxes. And then there was a big discussion on city ratings and how this works, and the one time and the ongoing. And I just wanted to point out, this was a couple comments and notes specifically from the August timeframe where we got our credit profile. And about the 4th line down on this, and it talks about the profile also benefits from strong financial management, so that's good news. Maintenance of healthy operating reserves, that's good news for us. The strong credit attributes are weighted against the city's wealth and income indices that trend below that of the nation, as well as its heavy reliance on economically sensitive sales tax revenues. Next slide. If you look at the Moody's opinion continues, it talked about how can you get an upgrade, how can you get a downgrade. We got a great opinion, so there wasn't really anything that could lead to an upgrade. Leading to a downgrade, substantial economic contractions measured by material declines in taxable values or sales taxes, which is why Terry got up during the Saturday workshop and said, Moody's may look down on this, and it's because of that. If you use one-time funds to cover this, they talk about factors that lead to a downgrade, a trend of operating deficits that decrease your general fund reserves. So that's why we gotten up in that meeting and I talked about that. Next slide. And this gets to Councilmember Zvonek. It gets a little bit to what we're talking about, why we're tying two things that appear disparate together. We've made a lot of current and previous decisions that have affected our tax base. And there, I think that there's actually, this is just a small list. There's a bigger list. It goes way back in time. The menstrual care products, the diapers, the government fee exemptions, those 3 right there, very recent, and had exemptions that amounted to about $1 million. And then, of course, we did the red tape reduction. Those were actually small dollar amounts, but good news stories in the amusement and the fine-free library. But the biggest choice that we had is back in the 70s, we decided not to tax groceries. All right, so next slide. So how, the great question as we were talking through, Councilmember Jersky says, well, how do other cities do it? So we went and looked at that. So you've seen this slide before. I just wanted to bring it back up and point out, so next slide, there's 26 municipalities in that area, 16 of them tax groceries. Of the ones that don't tax groceries, you'll see the ones that are highlighted are the ones that are OPT. But then Councilmember Jersky said, well, there's 5 here that don't do either. That's great. How do they do it? So I went and looked at those. Next slide. Castle Pines has a very small general fund budget. They actually don't get a lot of sales tax in. They get most of their money from building material use taxes. Castle Pines actually spends more on community development than public safety and more on economic development than public safety. They don't have a fire department, so they're not a full service city. I couldn't figure out how they did E911, but I will tell you, they just added $30,000 to their 2023 budget for support and analysis for a tax measure. So they're looking to find more money. Next slide. If you look at how Commerce City does it, $122 million budget. They're 80% is sales and use tax, so they're less diversified than even we are. Only about 25% of their money goes to public safety. They don't have a fire department. They don't have a library. So they use districts to cover those costs. And also they put their marijuana funds in their general fund. Next slide. Englewood. How does Englewood do it? $62 million. They're a lot like us. They have public safety courts, about 43%. We're higher. We're about 55%. They actually contract with the city of Denver for their fire, about $7 million. So if I was taking that and kind of ramping it up to what it would have looked like if Aurora did that, the equivalent of Denver of fire would be about 65% of what we do. Fire is our second largest department. So they get quite a bit of savings from that. They're also not full service. Next slide. Littleton, $56 million budget. They're the least diversified of the ones on the list. 85% come from sales and use tax. They don't pay for fire. They've got a South Metro Littleton Fire Protection District. They've got a South Suburban Parks and Rec District, and they were adding $50,000 for public opinion polling and public education to support potential ballot questions. So they're looking for more money, not less. And then last but not least is Lone Tree. Definitely a different ball of wax there. $52 million in the budget. Half of their budget's actually capital outlay. They don't have a fire district. They don't have a library. Police is only about 20% of their budget. And they just recently approved a 1% sales tax increase. So if you look at their projections in 2020, they were going to go from about $20 million in sales tax to about $40 million in 2022. Next slide. So last but not least, if we didn't have OPT, and this is where Councilmember Zvonek, why we pointed out, if we didn't have OPT, we would be the only city of the 26 that were noted that didn't have an OPT, that didn't tax groceries, and was a full service city without property tax districts for fire, library, or recreation. So in summary, just pointing it out from what we talked about this over the weekend, we would need ongoing cuts. It may affect our credit ratings. We would be a fiscal outlier compared to other area cities. And as Jeff pointed out, the fiscal benefits to individual taxpayers is relatively small. So with that, I am done and ready for questions.
Question for Mr. Hayes.
Comments.
Are there any questions or comments?
Durinsky.
Let me just say one thing first. I understand this presentation coming from the city, but I don't understand how Councilmember Jurinski is a sponsor of a presentation that's opposed to what she's trying to do. Can somebody explain that to me, how that happened?
Well, I guess that's what I was asking about before to continue on. I was just trying to respond to the questions from over the weekend and also to Councilmember Jurinski's question about how do other cities do it? Why can't we be like those other cities?
Councilmember Jurinski.
Can anybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, Greg, if you wanted to respond to me, you would have responded to me, and but you didn't. So you and Jeff, and I'm certain along with at least one of my colleagues, put this presentation together. I wasn't aware of this presentation. This was not the presentation that was ever presented in the M&F committee. If this is something that you wanted to tell me, you wanted to answer my question, I'm not sure why city staff didn't come back to me to answer my questions, as I'm the sponsor of the bill, of this ordinance, and could have at any time pulled it. I'm not pulling it. I'm going forward with it. And by your own summary comparison slide, If we're the only city not taxing groceries and doesn't have this occupational privilege tax, then we would be the only city that's doing it right. That's what I have to say about that.
Mayor?
Mayor Patel.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, although I understand that Greg was answering questions that we brought up on Saturday, which I thought most of them were answered on Saturday, I do find it disrespectful that the sponsor of the ordinance wasn't given this backup material. I mean, I just think it would just be fair that she would have this presentation since it is her, you know, it was her ordinance.
Mayor, can we hear from Jim Twombly? Can we hear from the CEO of this city why he has city staff setting up sitting council members?
City Manager, Mr. Twombly.
Yes, and it's not setting up city council members. It was in response to questions that were raised before all of council at the budget workshop. And so the feeling was that all of council should hear the responses. The other thing is we have a responsibility as staff to provide council with information so that they make fully informed decisions. And that's what this is about.
Mayor Zvonek.
Mayor.
Councilmember Zvonek. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember McConnell, then Councilmember Zvonek.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just honestly shocked at what I've heard here. So first, to my colleagues, please do not attack staff for doing their job. They have a responsibility to the public and to us to ensure that we are, as they said, making informed decisions. So if you're feeling personally attacked by them pointing out inconvenient truths, maybe analyze your policy instead of looking for a scapegoat. I want to remind you all that Aurora is an exceptionally lean and well-run city. What you're doing with this proposal is jeopardizing our credit rating, our ability to provide services to our residents, and God knows what else, at a time where we're being asked to do more, not less, by the people that we are all elected to serve. So you need to check yourselves, respect our staff, and respect the public. They deserve to know all this information as well. From my perspective, after getting this presentation, I am reaffirmed in my belief that this is asinine to even be considering this, given the situation that we are in, the great needs before our city, and the uncertain economic forecast. So unless you can come up with a way to make up for all of this money without cutting services, I don't want to hear it. This is a waste of time.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, Mayor, thanks. So I guess I have a similar response to Jim, because I understand and I respect the fact that staff brings forward information to provide to ensure that we're making informed decisions. But this was one-sided. There wasn't this is a path forward. This is how we could make it work. Here are some alternatives. That wasn't presented. Nowhere in here. In fact, it was just a list of horribles of what could happen. And I think it's a lack of creativity. It's a lack of leadership. And unfortunately, we're starting to see that. And I think that to all of my colleagues, we should want to hear, can we do this? Can we do something different and better, as opposed to just the negative? I think there is a path for us to get rid of the occupational privilege tax and not have to raise taxes on groceries. I know that's a great way to scare the public, and I'm sure that that's what maybe wasn't the intention, but it sure could have the effect of doing that. And I thought it was wildly inappropriate. But the bottom line is that this presentation was geared very one-sided. It was completely toward not doing it and how terrible it would be. There was, and a member of council brought forward a proposal, and I believe that staff has the responsibility to show the challenges, but also the path forward, and then let us, as the decision makers, make a decision on which way we want to go. But that wasn't presented. That wasn't the option or the opportunity that we were presented. It was all one-sided, and it's incredibly disappointing. And I know, Councilmember Marcano, you say that we don't want to hear the truth. I don't know that we heard the whole truth. And maybe you don't want to hear the whole truth, right? You only wanted to hear the side that reaffirms what you already believe. But I think that staff can do better, and I'm incredibly disappointed.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. We're the policymakers, so if you have a path to making this work, by all means, bring it forward. But you have to let people know exactly what you're going to cut, how it's going to impact their daily lives. And until then, this is magical thinking. This is a case study for magical thinking. You just want to wish something into existence. Maybe pigs will fly too, Dustin. Who knows? Incredible.
Further discussion.
Mayor,
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
I have a
I'm sorry,
question.
then, Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Murillo.
Okay, this proposal, is it, I know we had discussion at the workshop, but is it going to be effective January 1, 2023 or January 1, 2024? I'm asking this to Councilmember Jurenski. And then also if it is delayed to January 1, 2024, and should we end up in a recession, could we rescind it during that time frame?
Councilmember Jaworski.
Yeah, so I originally had wanted to put this into effect January 1, 2023, but realized it was getting, close to the budget meeting. So this proposal is for January 1st, 2024. And depending on how bad the recession gets, we would have the option to rescind it any time between now and then.
Right, but let me just qualify that, that under the Taxpayers Bill of Rights, we can rescind unilaterally, but this is a tax, it's not a fee. So should we want to reenact it, it would require a vote of the people. For Councilmember Jaworski, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So one thing that I wanted to say to Councilmember Marcano is, the path forward here is attracting businesses. If we, and I had said originally about this, if we put this together and we put a plan together and we talk to Kim, with communications, and we actually put this out. We put this out to the current businesses in Aurora, and we put this out, metro wide or however far, that this is what Aurora is doing. Aurora is leading the way. Like I said, if we're the only city that's not taxing groceries and doesn't have this occupational privilege tax, then we are the only city that's doing it right, in my opinion. And we attract some of these businesses. We get Southlands filled up. We're talking about $5.9 million a year, but I mean, on some of these fancy steakhouses that we seem to talk about all the time, we get a couple of those in the city. That $5 million is made up immediately on just a couple of businesses. Now imagine if we do that times 10, times 100. We fill up these vacancies, we fill up these vacant spaces. And it may not seem like a lot, Councilmember Marcano, to you, but businesses, restaurants are closing daily in your ward, in every ward in Aurora. But I spend a lot of time in Ward 4 and just realized a couple weeks ago that now Joe's Crab Shack has closed. So the area where you have a whole bunch of restaurants, they're closing down one by one. So where this occupational privilege tax to staff, who is exempt from this tax, doesn't mean a lot to them, and they put together a presentation, a very biased presentation like this, and like Councilmember Zvonek says, offers no path forward. How do we make up for this? There was no mention of how could we possibly make up for this 5.9 million. It's just doom and gloom. The whole city is going to come crashing down if we eliminate a tax that's a bad tax anyways. How about we focus on saving businesses and attracting new businesses? That's the path forward. How about Greg Hayes, you put together a presentation that includes, if we attract 5 new businesses that are doing $5 million annually in sales, what does that tax revenue look like? Why wasn't that included in the presentation? The bottom line is, that's the path forward. The path forward is to make Aurora the most business-friendly city in the state. That's the path forward. And I hope that my colleagues will support me on this.
Mayor.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you. Actually, did Councilmember Murillo have comment?
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Murillo.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted to, I can wait. But I mean, I've been waiting. So if you had something burning you wanted to share, go.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Councilmember. I actually did want to ask staff, what is the sales tax reform that's necessary to make this balance out? What's that bump that we need on an annual basis?
Good question. So if we're gonna make up $5.9 million, our sales tax is around 271. So an extra 2 to 3%.
In real dollars?
Yeah, yes. Now that's only to balance the 5.9, but if we're gonna balance to the $8.3 million, yeah, you'd be looking at a full 3% plus more in sales tax.
I think what the council member's asking.
Yeah, in sales. How much is that is in sales total?
That is talking about sales, increasing it in sales.
I think the question is,
I want the dollar amount, Greg. The percent, without the number directly in front of me, the percent doesn't make sense.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, if I am looking to find another $8 million, if we're on the same page here, in order to balance 2024, I need to find another $8 million.
$8 million in sales won't generate $6 million in taxes. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Oh.
Yes.
If I may.
Mayor, can I just point out real quick that this is further proving the point that staff came forward with an absolutely one-sided presentation. I just want to point that out in this exchange right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just misunderstood. Yeah, in order to get $8.5 million, you need 213.
213 million in sales?
That doesn't seem quite right.
Well, let me ask this question. Oh, Councilmember Moreno, let's go to you now.
Yeah, right around 213 million.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, I just wanted to say a couple of things. I appreciate staff bringing the presentation forward. From what I recall from the budget workshop, this was some of the follow-up that was requested. I know I have not always agreed with the presentation from a city staff perspective, but I think that speaks to their perspective in not being the policymakers. In fact, we created a whole ordinance saying that staff are not allowed to create ordinances. So I think they're giving us as much information as they feel is necessary. I think this to me feels very holistic in terms of comparing kind of where other communities are at, kind of what that would cost Aurora. I said this at one of our presentations when we heard this prior to the budget workshop that we weren't being very clear around where these dollars would come from, and I think that's just further underscored in the presentation today. So I know I haven't always been on the same in alignment with everything that the staff has presented. Even related to ordinances that I have proposed and resolutions. But I think that that's exactly what we asked for, and I think that they're doing their due diligence. So I just don't want to see us get caught up in kind of that aspect of it, and I want us to talk about kind of the merit of the conversation and not get swept away in that part of it. I guess is what I'm trying to get at. But yeah, I mean, just hearing kind of the comparison and the concerns, some of the biggest things that I think were concerning to me in the presentation were around jeopardizing our, a credit rating that we have benefited from. I'm concerned that that's going to be impacted. So I wanted to share that as well. I think also from a larger perspective, just the comparison of other municipalities and whether or not they have a similar tax or a different tax, and just the fact that Aurora is the third largest city, we do continue to grow. And as I said in our budget workshop, we have our Small Business Development Center. We also have our Economic Development Council that several of our council members are on as well. I think they're very well positioned to bring primary jobs to the city to support with other sources of revenue. And on the bit of diversifying our revenue, I do think this is a step away from that. And when I think about sustainability and being an insular, community, having kind of the ability to not wholly rely on one source of revenue, I think is really important. And also feels like a really salient point in my mind. So just wanted to offer my thoughts and thank you, staff, for your presentation.
To staff, that is that. So obviously we don't know what's going to happen to the economy. We think it's going to go down. We know we want to increase our reserves. There ought to be conditions that maybe not be time specific, where this tax could be phased out. And so it could be phased out in two parts. And so if what you didn't do, which I would like you to do, is to lay out the conditions where the tax could be phased out, maybe in two parts. The first part would be to the employees, the $2 across the board, and the second part would be to the employee. And it would be what revenue conditions would obviously would meet the requirements for the reserves, and then have a cushion that would be significant enough, because I think we're a very dynamic city economically, despite what may happen to the economy nationally, that then we could phase out the tax entirely, and that the ordinance would in fact be a placeholder to do that. Could you all come up with that kind of scenario?
Absolutely.
What's
Yes,
that?
we do that, Mayor. Yes, we will do that.
Okay, Councilmember Jersky, would it be okay with you as a sponsor of this proposal that we instruct staff to act in the affirmative, to come up with a plan to phase out the tax, and that they would then bring it to you, and then you would have the ability to reserve it, to observe it, and then review it, and then potentially bring it back to council?
No, absolutely not. A big part of the reason I'm bringing this forward, Mayor, is how businesses are treated. And with Jeff's fancy presentation, it sounded very nice that they treat businesses so well in Aurora, and that we're treated so well, and we're given all these notifications, we're given all these chances. First of all, when a business doesn't pay their occupational privilege tax, or doesn't know it's been paid, if they have a third-party payroll provider paying it, or however it works out, or if a discretionary amount has been paid and it wasn't, the full amount that was due that month for occupational privilege tax, I've never once been given a call and said, hey, you missed your deadline. We don't have your occupational privilege tax. I've never received an email like that. I've never received one of those first notifications that was in that presentation. I've only ever received a second notification at the 60-day mark, which again, the business owner would have had no idea. There's no communication from point A to point B. I don't care what his fancy slideshow said. I'm telling you, as a business owner in this city, there's no communication. So these bully letters go out, and so what you're proposing, and if you'd like to bring that forward, Mayor, as your own ordinance, you go for it. But this is about the businesses in this city, as well as the workers in this city. The businesses are treated horribly. And these notices, everything that was just described tonight, this must be some farce land that I've never had a business in, because I've never been treated that well by Aurora's tax department. So no, I absolutely reject that, and I would like to see if I have 6 votes for my ordinance intact as is for January 1st, 2024.
Well, let me ask you this, Councilmember Jersky, are those two separate issues, though? The conduct of our Department of Revenue, or tax and licensing, and the effect on the overall budget, aren't they two separate things? I mean, couldn't we deal with those two issues separately?
Well, I'm not sure, after seeing a staff presentation tonight that was a total setup and the CEO of Aurora completely backing it. I'm not sure how we would handle that situation, Mayor.
Okay, well, it is in my position that well, obviously we'll go to the question as to whether your proposal should move forward. I believe it should be bifurcated in 2 ways, and we should have staff come back and tell us how their method in terms of collecting the tax can be changed. And secondly, how the tax, to come up with a proposal of how the tax could be phased out. In the manner of the employees part first and the employers part second. But to the question of Councilmember Drisky's proposal moving forward, is
Mayor,
Mayor,
I have
I
a
have a
question.
question.
Councilmember McConnell?
Thank you, sir. Don't we have an ordinance that would probably trigger the pending ordinance doctrine that if you're going to propose an expenditure, which this is, you have to provide how you're going to offset that?
That's true. Because it wasn't done in the budget setting process.
Yeah.
Councilmember Drinsky, I'm afraid you would, in combination with the ordinance, provide how you're going to provide the offset from revenue.
Yourself said that as long as I brought it up in the budget meeting and made it aware and made everybody let it be known in the budget meeting that this was coming forward, that this was the plan. You yourself, Mayor, said that as long as I brought this to the budget committee meeting and brought this up in the budget meeting, that I would not have to fight.
I'm sorry for the miscommunication, but the ordinance is very clear.
Mayor?
It has to be resolved in the budget setting process. But the budget setting process is not over yet, is it not, Mr. Hayes? We haven't formally adopted the budget.
Hasn't been formally adopted yet.
Okay, so that it would not apply then.
So I would ask that this be passed tonight. I would ask for my colleagues' support to pass this tonight for January 1st, 2024. And depending on how next year goes, we can rescind that at any.
In the affirmative, Councilmember. I'm sorry, who's that? Councilmember Lawson.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So for staff, what is the percentage or the approximate of delinquencies that you may give out to businesses for not complying or paying this tax? Do you have that number? And then my second question, I'm just going to go ahead and say the second question is, have we contacted the AEDC to get their perspective, especially on the larger employers? Because I see that larger employers, if they want to come to Colorado, they're going to, if they have to choose between another state and they really want to come to Colorado, they're going to come to Colorado. So, and I don't think that this is going to stop them from not coming to Colorado $2. I understand, Councilmember Jurinski, it has an impact on the smaller businesses, possibly, but when we're talking about these large corporations that are coming in, that's why I want to know, what does AEDC say, or have we got their perspective of bringing in, because they bring in our larger employers. And I just don't think if they have a choice between Texas and Colorado and they really want to come to Colorado, they're not going to stop coming to Colorado because of $2. So I'm struggling with this in general, your proposal as originally proposed.
Okay.
So, Austin, can I
A further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Jersky and then Councilmember McConnell.
Yeah, so I did speak with the AEDC and I mentioned this in the budget meeting. I believe it was the budget meeting I mentioned in. The AEDC said that this would absolutely be a helpful tool for negotiating with these larger corporations, and it's from Mitchell herself. So.
Okay, Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to circle back to a comment that was made earlier, that we could recapture this with a couple of restaurants. So that's $213 million in sales that we would need to generate. Again, that would be sales tax specific, so that number drops during an economic downturn. I highly doubt a restaurant or two is going to make that difference. I mean, you're talking several big box retailers that are able to move high volume to do that. And we all know that the retail marketplace is changing as is. I think, the average chain restaurant will bring in between $4 to $6 million per year in revenue. That's, again, a quick Google, but that's, I guess the average for like a big brand name restaurant. So I just don't see that happening based with that. And with regards to Joe's, honestly, I feel bad for them and everyone else in that location over there on Abilene and Evans. It's tight, or rather it's difficult to get folks to that spot The access is not great off of Iliff. It's in an old deteriorated shopping center. And all that's left basically over there across the way are a couple of chain restaurants, with the exception of Real de Minas, which is an excellent, excellent spot. But it's a struggling area. And frankly, I think another part of the issue there is that Joe's food is really not that great, personal opinion, but I think that definitely contributes to the overall problem. So,
ouch.
yeah.
Okay, no.
Eric, can I ask you one question quick?
Councilmember Zawadi.
Yeah, just a question of staff, and because I don't have these numbers, and you don't have to get it right away, but over the past 5 years, how much each year has the general fund budget grown on an annual basis over the last 5 years? I mean, would it have covered if we had done this any year in the last 5 years? Would we have ended up making up for the $5.9 million in growth?
Let me go through and analyze that, but also with the expenditures as well. Yeah, we've had a couple good years, taking COVID out of the equation because COVID kind of just messed everything up one side and down. But I'll take a look at that and let you know.
Yeah, and let me just say, I renew my request to staff, and I'll work with you to come up with a phased elimination of this tax.
Mayor?
Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, just so on the phase-in plan, if it was presented to Councilmember Jurinski by staff, not to all of us, like she would get to look at it first, and then she could still decide yes or no to bring it forward. Is that my understanding?
I think Councilmember Jurinski can answer that. I believe she declined.
Well, I wanted clarification if staff would present it to her rather than just to the full council.
Well, Mayor Pro Tem, if she requested, yes, but she is
No.
not. I'm requesting.
I'm going back to the fact that she wasn't given the backup for this one. So I'm just asking, will staff, if she may not agree to this today, but if she was to agree to at least look at the plan, would she have the ability to look at it before anybody else?
If that's what the council member wants, yes.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the Jurinski plan of eliminating the tax on January 1, 2024, please signify by giving me an indication.
Zavonik.
Sundberg.
Bergen.
And Jurinski. Is there anyone else who rises in support? And let me just say that Councilmember Coombs' child is infant is very ill, or not very ill, but she had taken to the hospital today over a respiratory issue and cannot attend. So with 4 members arisen, it will not move forward. However, it is always at the discretion of a member whether or not to move it forward. With that, 3D, proposed modifications of moral obligations policy and review of existing moral obligations. Teresa Sedmak, City Treasurer.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. I am not going to attempt to turn my camera on because I think that might have been part of the problem. But good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Teresa Sedmak, City Treasurer, and I'm here to introduce the resolution related to proposed modifications to the city's moral obligation policy. The city adopted a policy on moral obligations in 2011. It has not been modified since that time. A moral obligation is a non-binding commitment to provide financial support to a project. The projects which the city grants moral obligation support are intended and expected to be self-supporting. According to the policy, projects which are unable to show that they are viable and self-supporting should not be supported by a moral obligation. MOs or moral obligations are typically used for projects that are considered important to achieving city goals and which would not otherwise occur, or which would be much more costly to finance absent the moral obligation support. The policy states that there should be a shared balance of risk and reward among the parties in the transaction. So last year, Councilmember Gruber requested a review of the moral obligations policy. To that end, staff and bond counsel did a thorough review and recommended a number of modifications, some of which were stylistic in nature, but the notable changes included a change in wording of the policy from moral obligation pledge to moral obligation support, as the word pledge implies a binding financial obligation and a pledge of collateral, neither of which is given when a moral obligation is adopted. The definition and summary of a moral obligation is now included within the policy and not an attached item. The policy explicitly prohibits substantive changes in the financing subsequent to the presentation to M&F unless the authorizing documents are within the confines of the related financing resolution, and the evaluation criteria was strengthened to include the timing and frequency related to the MO. For instance, if it would be a one-time or event, or if it was intended to be available over multiple time periods, and the likelihood of repayment of that moral obligation over time. So those are the substantive changes, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have in this regard.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving 3D forward? Seeing none, 3D will move forward. 3E, 2023 ward redistricting. Katie Rodriguez, City Clerk.
Hi, Mayor and council members. I'm Katie, the city clerk. I have Daniel also on the line, and he's going to share his screen.
Adrian, can I have the authority to share?
While that is being resolved, okay, here we go. This is for the 2023 ward redistricting. So the little QR code that you see at the bottom will bring you to the Engage Aurora site, and also has the interactive maps. Next slide. So just a little overview. Ward redistricting is a process where ward boundaries are reviewed and altered to ensure they're contiguous, compact, and contain approximately the same number of residents. The redistricting is done before election years ending in 3 and 9. We can also do it in the event of significant changes to the population and to bring the wards into conformance with county precinct boundaries. And then here's just an overview of the city code and charter, what is specifically outlined. So we do have 6 wards. They must be contiguous, compact, and contain approximately the same number of residents. If a common boundary between wards lie in any public street or right-of-way, the boundary is placed on the center line of the street. Again, they're reviewed before election years ending 3 and 9. And the ward boundaries are approved by council through an ordinance. They have to be approved at least 180 days before any regular municipal election. And then here's the criteria that was used to come up with the scenarios. So for the wards, of course, we divided them into 6 different wards. We wanted to make sure that sitting council members were not moved outside of their ward. We wanted to impact as few residents as possible, and then maintain a 5 to 10% deviation between the least and most populous wards. And for the boundaries, we used natural or man-made boundaries. We were trying to maintain whole county precincts. And again, as it says in the city code, we put the boundary on the center line of the street. Next slide. Thank you. The 2022 calendar. So We began meeting earlier this year in March. We went to MNF Policy Committee with an initial presentation. We met with the ward council members and election commission with the same information regarding criteria. And then we did, over the summer, public meetings. So we did one in each ward. We also used Engage Aurora for the residents to ask questions, take a survey, and then look at the interactive maps. In August, the Election Commission approved a plan, and then MNF Policy Committee met in August and September to review the plans and decided to move all the scenarios forward for council to discuss right now, October 17th study session. After this, it's an ordinance, we'll have 2 readings, October 24th and November 14th. And the deadline to adopt these new boundaries is May 11th. And here's just a little bit of information about Engage Aurora. So we did a public input survey. We had the interactive maps where you could look at the school districts, police area representatives, current scenario, ward boundaries, code enforcement areas. And then we put the meeting information for the public to attend virtual if they were not able to attend in person. And then we did do a press release and sent out flyers, and here are just a few of the different entities that we coordinated with to try to help spread this information so we could get as much public feedback and input as possible. And then now I'm going to hand it over to Daniel.
Thank you and good evening. For the recording, I'm Daniel Krasnowski with the city's Planning and Development Services Department. And I'll be leading you all through the math and maps section of this presentation. Identifying a new council boundaries is kind of a 2-step process. The first is really understanding who lives in Aurora, where people live in Aurora, and then the second part is manipulating the lines to better balance the ward boundaries. And so we need to start off with that population estimate. What you see in front of you is staff's population estimate for March 31st, 2022. The way we developed that was starting on the left-hand column with the Census 2020 population for the 6 wards and the city as a whole. Of course, that was many months ago, so we wanted to account for new residents who have moved to Aurora since Census Day. So what you see there is the number of new housing units that received a certificate of occupancy. Of course, we count people, not houses, so we did an estimate of the number of new people who have moved into those new houses. And then you add those up, and in the right-hand column, that is a total ward population estimate, again, for the 6 wards and for the city as a whole. Again, this is that population estimate for the current date, which is March 31st, 2022. The middle and right columns are provided to indicate how much larger or smaller each ward is from sort of a perfectly balanced scenario. Based on the city's population estimate, 1/6 of that would be 67,160. Each of the 6 wards had that population, they'd be perfectly balanced. As you can see on the table, that is not the case. Some are much smaller, some are much larger than that balanced number. And so that's the middle column is that sort of raw number, larger, positive or negative, smaller, and then also done in a percentage. As you can see, wards 2 and 6, not surprisingly, are larger than the balanced target, whereas the other 4 are smaller. In your packet, we provided a number of scenarios to move, to change those ward boundaries to try to better balance population among the 6 wards. Scenarios 1 and 2 were developed by staff really to illustrate sort of how moving voting precincts from one ward to another can change those numbers and move those estimated populations towards a more balanced number. So I'll go through scenarios 1 and 2 quickly. What you see on the left-hand column is based on that updated map, which I believe was provided. So something provided to council in the council office as well. Based on that scenario, you see the estimated ward populations. The middle column is how much smaller or larger than that perfectly balanced ward target is. And then in percentage, as you can see, by moving these 8 to 10 these precincts, it brings those numbers closer to that target. Wards 2 and Ward 6 are smaller than that target, and Ward 4 as well. Under this scenario, the 3 others are slightly larger. On the right-hand column is the list of precincts that were moved in this scenario, and what ward they were in, what ward they've been moved to, and the population impact. So as you can see, as you're moving sort of 8 to 10 of these precincts around, it moves can move several thousand population from one ward to another. Scenario 2 is the same mechanics. It provides some precincts move from ward to ward. The intent behind this sort of example scenario was to move sort of as few ward boundaries as possible, but still aiming towards a more balanced population. As you can see on the right-hand side, that list of wards that have moved from one ward to another is shorter. And then on the left-hand side, you see those populations estimates as well. So these scenarios 1 and 2 were both presented to the public through that series of public outreach opportunities, as well as online. It was also presented to the Election Commission for their consideration, and they really picked up from those scenarios and developed a series of additional scenarios. What you see is scenario 4, which is a Election Commission created scenario. Same as the past few slides, it shows the estimated ward population based on the moved lines, how much larger or smaller than the balanced population, and then which specific precincts moved from one ward to another. And then scenario 5 is also produced by the Election Commission. There's one change between 4 and 5, and that is to put the precinct that is sort of Hampton Town Center on Hampden to leave that in Ward 3. As you can see, the result of scenario 5, and this is the scenario that the Election Commission voted to recommend and bring forward to council. Just to overwhelm people with graphs, these are the 4 scenarios, population estimates, and happy to answer questions.
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually commend staff and the Election Commission, because I know they put so much work into this over months and months, trying to make sure that they kept the wards, boundaries contiguous and so forth. So just want to say thank you.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor?
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. So scenario 4 is not reflected on the GIS link in the packet, but am I correct in understanding, Daniel, that the only change is the Hampton Town Center in 4 that goes to Ward 5, and in scenario 5 it stays in Ward 4?
Yes, that's the only difference between 4 and 5. Those are very similar.
All right, great. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mayor, I just wanted to say that we also have the chair of the Election Commission here. I don't know if he has any additional comments or if council has questions for him as well.
Please proceed.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my name's Scott Irvin. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm the chair of the Aurora Election Commission.
I just wanted to start off by saying that there was quite a few differences between this year and the last time that we redistricted, and staff did a really great job at making sure that we had board meetings in each ward. And previously, we had just done one large board meeting, and that took a lot of time to pull off. And so I just want to say thank you to them. Also, they were able to speed up the process quite a bit, and I think that took a lot as well. And so I'm really proud of what they were able to do. The commission definitely has been more involved this round versus last redistricting process. They had gone to, basically we had done weekly meetings, so we would do more planning meetings every other week, and then we would go to the ward meetings following that. So it was pretty involved work, and so I'm definitely proud of the work that they had done. Scenarios 1 definitely accounted for more population growth. It was definitely kind of something that kind of went against the criteria in a sense because we wanted to impact as few as people as possible. Whereas scenario 2 still accounted for population growth. Or scenario 2 did not account for population growth, but it was more in sync with the criteria. So the question quickly became as whether we should plan for the future or impact as few residents as possible. During the last redistricting process, it definitely was important for population for public comment. They had believed that we should certainly not move that many residents during the last redistricting process, but this time a lot of public comment was to plan for the future, and people were more willing to be moved in order to do so. And then also talking to City Council, it seemed as though City Council wanted us to also prepare for the future. And so moving more residents was kind of more legitimized by those two feedbacks. So something that was really important for us was to make sure that 2 and 6 had as few residents as possible within the deviation, and to make sure that they had more room for growth. So that was kind of the strategy there. We also wanted to make sure that precinct 258, which is currently Ward 4, we wanted to make sure that that went into Ward 5. And the reason for that really was to make sure that it was not a split ward, because currently it's a ward that's split between two, it's a split precinct between two different wards. And so that's going to be moving into 5. That would be important just to make sure that, that was ward precinct 302 was split between 2 and 5, and that's going into 5. And that's to prevent any issues with ballot coding in the future. And then 258, as we mentioned, is that annexed precinct over in West Aurora. That was kind of an unnecessary move for us in scenario 1. We felt that it should just stay in ward number 4 because it's also would impact people for no real reason.
Further questions of the commission chair?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Scott, for that brief. So I just want to clarify that the precinct at the Hampton Town Center, that is no longer a split precinct, if I'm understanding you correctly, because I know that there were ballot coding issues with that precinct in the past as well.
I don't think that one was the one that we were originally split. I think it was 302 that was split currently. The only one, the 258, that was the annex one, and that one was not divided, but it is out there by the West Hampton.
If I could add to that, that was the one that was previously split several years ago when the county redid their precincts. They included that in one single precinct, so it's not a split anymore.
All right, great news. Thank you.
Was that the problem with the ballots last time?
No, that was up in Adams.
Okay.
That was portion of 302 precinct.
Okay.
Yeah, and affected Ward 2 and 5.
Thank you. Further questions of the commission chair or staff? Okay. Seeing none, Katie, how do you want us to proceed? Is action required today?
Yes, so if council is ready to move one of the scenarios forward to vote on, that would be what we're requesting today. So since this is an ordinance, we would need to know which scenario council would like to see moved forward.
Was there a recommendation by the commission?
Election Commission recommended scenario 5.
Okay, very well. Okay, I'm open, we don't take motions here. I'm open for a non-motion.
Yeah. I guess any objections to 5?
Yeah, any objection?
Is there 5, does someone want to move 5?
I'm happy to support 5, Mayor. I think it makes sense.
Is there, those supporting 5, if they can indicate their support?
Bergen.
Marcano, Bergen,
Lawson.
Lawson,
Zavonic.
Sunberg.
Sunberg.
Dina.
I'm sorry.
Medina.
Okay, very well.
Murillo.
Okay, enough support, it has enough support to move forward, so item number 3E will move forward. Item number 3F, ward realignment recommendation deadline. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor. So following on this same topic, this ordinance, it's pretty simple. What it does is it ensures predictability for rewarding in future years. So it just sets a deadline of October 15th to have all the work done. And for those of y'all who might recall 2019, this was a bit of a stressor for a lot of folks who were considering running or running in wards because the redistricting wasn't done until I think nearly the summer. So there were folks who were running and they weren't sure what seat they were going to end up in. So the intent here is to make it clear for the public and for potential candidates to know which part of the community they're stepping up to serve.
Very well.
Mayor?
Mayor Protem?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm confused why it needs to go forward. Is it a resolution or ordinance?
It's an ordinance because there's currently not a date certain in our code.
So
that's how we ended up in that situation. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, but I thought Councilmember Gardner and Councilmember Zavonic, aren't they the ones that changed the date in M&F? Changed the date schedule? They advanced.
Councilmember Zavonic.
Yeah, so what had happened, what you're referring to, Council, you're correct, but we didn't formalize anything. What had happened was the original presentation that was brought to M&F with myself, Councilmember Murillo, and Gardner was a presentation that had the rewarding going well into next year. I want to say the original, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but it was May. I mean, it was pretty far into next year, which did not make sense. So we had requested the city clerk to move that time frame forward so that it would be done by the end of this year, which we have done. Obviously, here we are talking about it. But I think what Councilmember Marcano is doing is saying, hey, going forward, we're going to codify the fact that this should in fact be done in the year before so that it doesn't bleed into that following year.
Yeah.
Mayor?
Councilmember Murillo.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I was also on the M&F committee, which I appreciate Councilmember Zavonic clarifying. I think the other thing is, I mean, yeah, that could be variable. And I think the only requirement is, I think, 120 days before the election that it needs to be finalized, which anyone who's ever run a campaign or paid attention, like these things need to be determined well in advance if you're truly trying to, be a viable kind of candidate. So just having that potential to change so close up until the election just didn't seem, that's why we moved it up. So I guess I support the codifying that as well.
Yeah, Mayor.
Mayor Protem.
Yeah, I know I support it as well. I think, when we were running in 2019, we didn't even know where to campaign because we didn't have it done. So.
Further discussion. Is there any opposition to moving 3F forward? Seeing none, 3F will move forward. 4A, update on the Potomac campus. Jessica Prosser, Director of Housing and Community Services.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. This is an informational only update. Momentarily, I'll turn it over to Aurora Mental Health and the Housing Authority to provide a brief presentation. Just wanted to provide a little background. Council decided during the winter workshop in 2022 to put funding towards the Aurora Mental Health or Potomac campus, as they're referring to it. for the purposes of aligning some of the services needed in Aurora around mental health and behavioral health, crisis services, detox, walk-in services, and so replacing some of the services on other parts of the city currently, as well as adding some medical and then a housing component to the project. That was supported by council to move forward at the $7 million level. So similar to a couple weeks ago during study session, we're bringing back just a general update on this ARPA funded project. The other piece to the project that was funded is a $1 million commitment through our community investment project for the housing component that Aurora Housing Authority was selected through a competitive process that Aurora Mental Health did earlier this year. And so at this point, I will turn it over them to provide a brief presentation. Debbie or Kelly, I assume one of you two will kick it off from here. And then if you still need share access, please let us know for the presentation.
Thank you. Mayor, may I move ahead, Mayor?
Please do.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Debbie Stafford here with the Aurora Mental Health Center. And if it's okay, go ahead, Nazan, and bring our slides up. We do want to give you an update on the status of our project, and this campus is getting ready to move forward. We want you to realize that we are consolidating our crisis services, as well as we will be consolidating our substance use services, detox, our crisis stabilization unit, and our daily walk-in services. This will come over to a one-stop campus over at 1290 South Potomac, and phase 1 will be the building of the acute care campus. This is perfect for first responders, law enforcement, because they will be able to come to one-stop drop. And we are a certified community behavioral health center. So Nazan, are you able to pull our slides up? And maybe Jessica, we need to share there. Because the Aurora Mental Health Center is a certified behavioral health clinic. And what that means is we have federal designation as well as state designation. So I'm hoping we can see our slides. Or Jessica, are you able to bring our slides up? I just want to move this through, and then I'll move it over to Dr. Kelly Phillips Henry.
Hi, Debbie. Who do we want to give presentation rights to?
Nazan Wolf.
Okay, very good.
Thank you so much. As that's coming up, I do want to let you know that the Aurora Mental Health Center actually just recently heat mapped over 17,000 clients that we served last year, and we will get each council member a number of which constituents in your ward were served and how many were youth. And so just want to remind you that by state statute, we are the state mandated safety net for the community of Aurora. And our oversight is to over 5 state agencies, as well as the new Behavioral Health Administration and our federal government. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Kelly Phillips Henry. She's going to give you kind of some foundation of the project, and as we're moving forward to our demolition coming up very soon. Kelly?
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, and want to quickly take you through a few slides and then get you onto your next agenda item. Next slide, please. So a quick reminder, we brought forward a problem that was really recognized in our community. If we could hit that slide, that would be wonderful. I don't know if it's frozen.
I apologize. It's not letting me move forward. Oh, sorry.
So
can you see that?
Yeah. So if you could just go back one more. Thank you. So we had our crisis services and all of our 24/7 services across the Aurora area. It was not centralized, and this did not provide a convenient drop-off location for anyone in our community to be assessed for these services or any of our first responders. And so we needed to think about how we brought all these services together. We also, part of our problem is that these services right now are located in an old barracks building on the Anschutz campus, which doesn't provide best of care in terms of having line of sight and good safety for that location to really be able to best serve those most in need. Next slide. We may have a delay, so I will just keep talking. We were leasing space at the old Jefferson Hills building from our partner, Jefferson Center for Mental Health. When we learned they were going to put that building up for sale, we approached them and said, we would like to be able to turn this into a 24/7 care facility. Would you consider selling to us at a reduced price? That was a deal we were able to meet. We purchased that land a little over 2 years ago. And so really the goal is to bring together all of our 24/7 services into one building. And you heard previously those service lines that would include. It is a 7.3 acre campus. And what that allows us to do when we reposition that building is to ensure that we could make it serve the entire population for those safety net needs. And so as we get further into the presentation, you'll see that that includes not only Aurora Mental Health, but also Aurora Housing Authority for many permanent supported units that we would support with them, as well as ongoing conversations with Stride, which is a federally qualified health clinic for meeting medical and dental needs. Next slide. This is best practice. We've studied a couple of models of this across the country. The best one that demonstrates that is in Southern California. And so I'll turn it over to Nazan Wolf, our Director of Plant Operations, to take you through the project goals.
Thank you, Kelly. So as you can see, our project goals, we are planning to demolish the existing building on our 7-acre site. It's a currently 50,000 square foot building in the middle of the site. By doing this, this allows us to divide the property into 3 parcels. In that way, we will have room for our acute care center, as well as introduce the housing and medical development on adjacent properties, or adjacent parcels, excuse me. So the breakdown of the safety net campus, demonstrates our building on the site. It'll be approximately 50,000 square feet. B would be our partner for the medical care of the site. And then also C would, we'd be partnering with Aurora Housing Authority, who's planning to build 43 units of permanent supportive housing. So taking a look at the campus from the Potomac Street entrance, on the left of the screen would be the 4-story housing units. In the center there, you see our building, and then to the right would be the medical clinic. For a closer view, you can see that our building, we're planning on having lots of windows. This would introduce the environmental of our landscaping into the building, which definitely is a therapeutic advantage for our clients. We also will be using a lot of different materials found here on this next slide that would be warm and welcoming, such as the wood features, and then of course more glass. This is a modern contemporary look that we are looking at having for this site. Our schedule, as you can see, we're working on design currently. It should be completed next summer, with our substantial completion after the construction starts at the end of 2024, and then we plan to occupy the new building in 2025. Our overall project budget is currently at $38.4 million. Over a year ago, we had started to look at procuring our site and having just about 35,000 square foot interior finish. With our architects, they have shown that we actually need to use all 50,000 square feet of this, so the interior finish will be completed at the time of our construction completion. And we've also had escalations It's been unprecedented cost escalations in the construction market, as you can see in these graphs. With the lower left, the index for Denver is 4.5%, and which is above the 2.9 nationally. And I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie for the funding summary.
We just want to talk to you about existing funding. We do have some outstanding funding as well. We're very grateful. You can see the entities who have already committed funds or actually given funds. And the city of Aurora, we are very grateful for your commitment of $7 million. We have $5 million from Arapahoe County. We have other entities that have given. We still have some federal dollars that we're waiting to be finalized. And then these dollars will be collectively taken together and applied with the state match. One of our primary asks of the state will be a match with House Bill 1281 dollars. And that would be a $19.8 million ask. As our budget increases, we are finding that we are still looking at a shortfall. And so we are now working on the shortfall. One of the things about being a community mental health center, there are no funds available for any capital expenditure. We are only reimbursed for service delivery. And so as we move forward, we are now trying to find ways to access our gaps. Go ahead to the next slide, Nazin, and then we'll pass it on back to Kelly.
Okay, so our next steps, we are demolishing the current building. So you should be able to see that movement happening starting about the middle of next month. We're starting our schematic design in our design development phase for our detailed design plans. We are also working on a contingency plan for the fundraising. We've raised almost 40% of our goal. We will also look to a capital campaign. We're looking at our pending ARPA funding, pending opioid settlement dollars, and then we're looking at selling some of our existing properties. So I will hand it back to Kelly.
Great. So again, I want to be respectful of your time, but wanted to show you the progress to date. This has been a 2-year progress thus far, and we look forward to getting to next month and starting really the way forward to begin the design and development of the new building.
So Kelly, I think Dana Ashley Ohm has joined us as well from the Aurora Housing Authority, and she would be able to give an update on their portion.
Hi, this is Dana Ashley Ohm with the Aurora Housing Authority. Thanks for including me in tonight's presentation. Just wanted to talk a little bit about that permanent supportive housing. What the Housing Authority intends to do is partner with Aurora Mental Health so that we can take their high needs, high acuity clients and identify them and then have them have a place to live that's right on that campus. So we anticipate with our initial work with architects being able to construct about 44 units of permanent supportive housing, along with some best practices, spaces for staff and for gathering within the building. And so we're excited about putting together a design package and a budget that we can take forward to the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority in their February 9% low-income tax credit round. And so that takes a few months to compete against all of the other applicants in the community and find out our result. But if so, we would take the pre-development dollars, the ARPA dollars that the city has provided to us, and be able to use that as a show of good faith that this is a city-supported project, and then have CHAFA look at that and look at our project in competition with others. Since we do have so much city support, it's going to bode well for us. And then I just think this campus is a remarkable collective idea, and I give Aurora Mental Health a lot of credit for thinking outside of the box on how this land could be used, because land is a very, very scarce and necessary commodity in the housing production market.
Well, Thank you, Dana. And I think most of you would know that Stride is our other partner that is looking to finalize, and their new chief executive officer started his new role today. So this will be one of the first things on his plate that you'll hear more about in the future. Kelly, any more you'd like to add?
No, thank you for your time. We appreciate being able to share this update.
Thank you. Any questions of Aurora Mental Health?
Mayor Sunberg.
Councilmember Sunberg.
Thank you, Kelly, Debbie, Nazan, for the presentation. As you know, this first question relates to staffing. As you know, hiring great people is certainly a challenge across so many sectors of our economy. Have you been able to project yet numbers of staffing for this facility? And if so, are you going to be able to shift people from other buildings or hire? And will you be able to pay them top salary?
The good news is that all of these services are currently already operating within our system. These are program expansions. They are not new service lines. And so really what that allows us to do is take our current and existing staff and make sure that we have those job postings early enough while the building is still getting in that final phase of being ready so that we can post those positions for hire. I think that you ask an important question. Workforce is critical right now in behavioral health. It's not only a state shortage, it's a national shortage. We're partnering with the Community College of Aurora to create a new pipeline beginning next year, and we'll be doing the clinical training components of that pipeline. So I think, as we look at the next couple of years, that will be a critical component that we really continue to increase recruiting. We have brought salaries up last year over $6 million, this year approaching $2.5 million. We're trying to stay competitive to the extent our rates will allow us to do that.
And my last question, thank you, is the place has a lot of amenities going across the board, making it a one-stop shop. Will there be a type of day center where those who are experiencing homelessness can hang out, eat without having to leave the property?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, our homeless services are a little ways away, but it doesn't mean that we haven't thought about considering in some drop-in areas. Certainly, that is where our walk-in crisis services will be, as well as our Connect to Care location, where anyone can start their first therapeutic encounter there. And so that's something we can take a look at with the schematic and see what there might be available.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you for the update. I know that you do provide detox services currently at your facility. So in this new campus, will that be expanded as well? As you know, we have a crisis in our state when it comes to drug use.
Correct. The beds will be expanding for detox. And so prior to the pandemic, we had 30 beds. Due to state licensing, because of the pandemic, we had to bring those numbers down because of the requirement of number of folks in room. We're back up, almost approaching 30. With the new building, we'll be expanding to 45 beds.
To 45 beds. Okay, that doesn't even seem like that might be enough, but maybe you can get some more money out of Arapahoe County and Adams County because they didn't match the city.
We're working on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I will tell you, Adams County has actually already recognized that they would like to up their contribution because they've seen what the city and county have done.
Further questions or comments to staff or to Aurora Mental Health partners? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate all you do.
Thank you, Mayor.
Very much.
Okay, I'm gonna go do 5B first, and then 5A. 5B, I asked Councilmember Marcano earlier to do a presentation on the trip that he led to Houston to look at their program, and then requested that Councilmember Dustin Zavai do a presentation on the trip that he led to San Antonio. Councilmember Zavai.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So can you pull up I have a few slides to share. Roberto or Adrian.
Adrian, do you have the presentation that I provided to you earlier for you to share? If not, I also provided it for Katie if Adrian is not able to share.
I do. Give me a second.
Thank you. This one.
That's the wrong presentation.
Adrian, if you give me sharing, I have the presentation pulled up. Just give me sharing abilities.
Deja vu there. Time warp. All right, Katie can bring it up.
Yeah, I have it up, Adrian. Just let me share.
Can you go to the next slide, Katie? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. And I'll just kind of cue you along the way. There's only short presentation, just 4 quick slides. Thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to share. And thanks again, as I mentioned last week at council, to my colleagues who joined me on this trip. I think that the conversation that we are having as a council it's long overdue about moving toward a comprehensive strategy to address homelessness and instead of simply managing our homeless population. And as the mayor mentioned, Councilmember Marcano had put together a trip to Houston earlier and to look at their Housing First model. I had learned about the Haven for Hope through some of my own research on various comprehensive models, and thought that it would be give us another example of a possible comprehensive approach to take. Is the thing that really stuck with me is that they seek the original mission of Haven for Hope was to seek to address the root cause of homelessness by offering a program that's tailored to specific individuals. They meet people where they are and what their individual path is in terms of moving towards self-sufficiency is tailored toward them. It's an approach that focuses on recovery, and the goal is to their stated goal is to meet individuals where they are and support them as they move towards self-sufficiency, which is something that I strongly believe is the most important metric that we should have when we talk about actually addressing homelessness. It shouldn't just be the number of beds that we provide or the number of meals that we provide. Both are essential in terms of meeting emergency needs, but really it's how many people are we transforming their lives from the streets to becoming self-sufficient. And Haven for Hope, I believe, would give us an opportunity to do that. So next slide, Katie. So some of the key takeaways after visiting there, visiting the Haven for Hope campus was the co-location of services. We don't have a map in this presentation, but if you look in the backup, there's for those of you who are listening in, or for those of you who are unable to join the trip, you can see you have a one-stop campus, the co-location of all the various services. There were some good things that we took away from that. I'd say, having everything from your emergency shelter to the navigation center, which is your case managers, to the, whether it's addiction and recovery, job training, all of it on one campus. I think that was a positive. I think one of the negatives that I took away, and I believe some of my colleagues shared this, was the proximity of the emergency shelter, which is where people are coming in. San Antonio like Aurora and frankly like Houston have camping bans. And as people are moving from the streets into the emergency shelter, there was an area in San Antonio or at Haven for Hope that was referred to as the courtyard. The proximity of that courtyard to the residential area where there were children and families, I thought could be done differently and should be done differently. It is it's a very raw experience as you're going through that courtyard and seeing people who are in many cases still under the substance of or under the influence of substances and have not actually yet received any sort of treatment or help. And again, the proximity there. So I think that the co-location of service, there's a lot of positive to it. I think there are some variations that as we look forward, we should consider. I think that the other thing that stood out to me was the collaboration between the support service providers, having right there on campus their version of Aurora Mental Health, the very, whether it's medical service, to be available and ready for those who are entering the emergency shelter to provide services to those who are coming in. I also think that the high profile nature of the campus, the visibility of it was a huge benefit to the city of San Antonio. San Antonio is a big city and has a significant homeless population. But as my colleagues and I had an opportunity to go and walk around the city beyond the campus, it really stood out that in a lot of the areas that you would expect there to be homeless, given what we see here in Aurora and frankly in the Denver metro area. We didn't see that, and a lot of it, I think, is attributed to the fact that this campus is it's well advertised. People know about it. They're aware of the services, and so I think having that high-profile visibility within the community, where people know to go and where people know to send people who need to receive these services was important and a key takeaway for me. And then I think that the last one was the services that are available to anybody who wants them. And I think that is something that I think we have to strive for as we look forward, is making sure that the services that are needed are in fact available for those who want them. Next slide, Katie. One of the other takeaways for me, and I frankly believe this going into it, and in part because of the research that I had done around this, but now after having visited this campus, listening to the presentation from Councilmember Marcano, and then hearing stories from my colleagues and from other people who've worked in this field in homeless services, who visited campuses like this in other parts of the country. When you look at these comprehensive models, there's a lot of common ground. And I said this in our last council meeting. I think that when we look forward at what Aurora can do and what the Denver metro area can do from a comprehensive standpoint, there's a lot of common ground for us to begin our work on. And it starts with, in each one of these communities, you had some sort of a camping ordinance. And it varied in terms of enforcement time. I know in Colorado Springs, it's 24 hours. Our new ordinance is 72 hours. There was variations, but they all had that camping ban or some sort of camping ordinance in place, recognizing that having homeless in encampments along the highways and neighborhoods next to business, it's not good for their communities. It's not good for their residents or businesses, and it does not actually get them to a place to where they can access services. And so some sort of a camping ordinance was common ground. There was the collaboration among providers and across jurisdictions, and I would hope that whatever we look at going forward, we're able to do that. The co-location and integration of supportive services, I think that was a little bit different based on the presentation that Councilmember Marcano talked about in Houston, where it was a little bit more spread out than what we saw that was witnessed in Colorado Springs, or that we saw in San Antonio. They all did have the emergency shelter, and it varied. I think that the outdoor space that was available in San Antonio could work here, and there's obviously some challenges with that from a weather perspective. But they all had emergency shelters, the navigation centers with case managers, the access to the support services, whether it's behavioral, addiction and recovery, and then access to jobs and vocational training. I was a little bit disappointed when I learned in San Antonio that they'd moved away from a requirement for the vocational training. we've seen it work successfully here in programs like Ready to Work, and I think that that's an important part of the condition that should be put around transitional housing. All of them had some sort of transitional housing. Some of them refer to it as housing first. Some of them refer to it as transitional housing. Some of this is just definitions to meet criteria within the federal government and the way that they fund through HUD. And then there was the medical services. So I think, again, as we look at these various comprehensive models that as a council, some of us have seen one of them or two of them, and some of us have seen all of them. But we've been looking at how can we take bits and pieces of these various comprehensive models and move forward with some sort of a strategy of our own. We see that we start with a great foundation of a lot of common ground. Well, the other thing I want to talk about next, and next slide, Katie, is the differences. And I think that this is really where I hope that the discussion going forward happens, and that is when we see what's possible in terms of the commonalities between the various comprehensive models, we have to recognize that there are some differences. And the first one being the conditions or requirement for housing, what I say here, beyond the 15%. And that number, depending on who you ask, is anywhere from 15 to 25%. And what I mean by that is that there is, without question, there is a segment of the unhoused population that because of physical or mental disabilities are unable to ever move towards self-sufficiency and are going to need some sort of permanent supportive housing. And we just heard a presentation from Aurora Mental Health that they're going to, as part of their new campus, they have 44 units. I think that permanent supportive housing has to be a part of a strategy for that portion of the homeless population that is never going to reach self-sufficiency. But that still leaves an overwhelming majority of people who are experiencing homelessness that have the ability to reach self-sufficiency with the right incentives and conditions for treatment to move towards independence. And I think that is one of the differences in the models that we saw in San Antonio, that they have in Houston, and what they have in Colorado Springs and the rescue mission. In Colorado Springs, they much more incentive-based, more conditions around housing. And I think that is an important difference between the two, and something that we have to take into consideration. And the final one is the reliance on public versus private funding. The federal government for over a decade now has had a preference towards housing first. It's unfortunately a very stringent requirement and is inflexible in a lot of ways. And I think that having that requirement of housing first for everybody is actually a disservice to those who could become self-sufficient, because it's all too often, particularly with the male population, homeless male population, that where you might have somebody who has suffered from anxiety or depression at a lower level, and instead of getting any sort of help or treatment, they're treating it with drugs, and years of sustained abuse leads to a situation where they might present as having dementia or or schizophrenia, and they get written off as being a part of that 15 or 25% population, saying, look, they can't be helped. But the truth is, unless we put a condition for them to get the treatment for addiction first in that recovery, we're never going to know that they could actually reach self-sufficiency. And I don't think that that's compassionate. And I think we leave people behind. And so while I think that, again, there is a segment of the population that won't ever be able to reach self-sufficiency, there's plenty who can. And so my big takeaway was that from San Antonio and visiting the Haven for Hope is that there's a lot of common ground that we can find as we look for a comprehensive model for our city. But there are some differences that we're going to have to discuss through. And I think that this is a conversation that's long overdue. And I'm happy that so many of my colleagues have taken interest and gone on these various trips to learn more about alternatives that exist. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or have any of my colleagues who are able to participate chime in.
Questions for Councilmember Zavonic?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Yes, thank you, sir. And thank you for that summary of the trip, Councilmember Zavonic. I do want to add a couple of things, though, as we were touring the campus, one of the things that our guides were asked is, what could you change if you could start it all over again? And one of the things that they felt very strongly about is getting rid of the conditions for basically improved living circumstances based off of commitments for folks, as they noted that caused people to languish in the courtyard, and they never really moved beyond that. And they acknowledged that, other programs that have lower barriers to entry see greater levels of success due to being able to basically serve more folks out of, off the bat. And I don't recall them ever mentioning, I guess a PSH hole, for lack of a better term, like you mentioned. And it still seemed like that was the exit point of their program. Basically, they would put folks up in the PSH that they built on site. I think they had a population of around 1,500 people, if memory serves. And that was basically the exit point from the program, where folks would, get into some level of self-reliance. I think they also mentioned self-sufficiency isn't a good term, because no one's really self-sufficient, whether you are, the lowest income you can be or as wealthy as you can be, due to the interconnectedness of our society. But that's maybe more of a semantic issue. But yeah, aside from that, I think it's a great recap of the trip. And thanks for organizing that.
Further discussion? Seeing none, thank you, Councilmember Zavani. For that
Oh,
brief.
Mayor. Sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, sorry. Just wanted to say that I toured Colorado Springs Rescue Mission and then the Haven for Hope. And I do hope that we, that we go with the incentives and the work requirements that Councilmember Zavonic talked about. And I was very impressed with the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission model personally.
Okay. Further questions or discussion?
Mayor Sundberg.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Just a quick, simple observation. I remember one comment that was made, perhaps it centered around obligations that they might have. And what was said was that these people are the CEOs of their own lives. And you got to ask the question, well, how's that working out for them, right? As the CEO of their own lives. And it just reinforces the notion and the belief that they need guidance. They need navigation. They need someone to come up alongside them in this journey, and perhaps at times hold them accountable. So that navigational piece, I believe, is fundamental.
Very well. Further questions or comments? Thank you, Councilmember Zavani. So item number 5, we'll go to item number 5A, and then item number 5A essentially is advice for the city that I think is time sensitive, with the deadlines coming up to submit request for funding from the state. And so essentially what it does, so if you look at Haven for Hope, well, first of all, let me just say, there's not going to be one solution fits all. And so we already have quite a mix of approaches in the city of Aurora. As was mentioned earlier, Aurora Housing Authority is building, I believe that it's going to be 60 units of permanent supportive housing, along a housing first model that will be on the Aurora Mental Health campus. They are also breaking ground on a permanent supportive housing apartment building for veterans on the Anschutz Medical Campus. The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has already built a permanent supportive housing for veterans along the Anschutz Medical Campus as well. We have the nonprofit Second Chance Center has the Providence at the Heights, which is a permanent supportive housing, but for people coming out of incarceration that might otherwise be homeless. And then we have the Ready to Work program, which is along a work first model. We've got a Comitas Crisis Center, which has a variety of programs in it, from addiction recovery to families, to supporting families, to individuals. We've got the Day Resource Center, which in a way acts as a navigation center and can be converted into a 24-hour shelter. upon request, which is usually inclement weather. So we have a lot of different programs that are here. The question is if we go forward with the campus, what should that look like? And I think Haven for Hope provided a foundation. Where I might differ from Haven for Hope, and that is in this resolution that would define the future in terms of what the campus would look like programmatically, is that um, the incentives are stronger in the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission, which is an iteration of Haven for Hope. The founders of that program first went to Haven for Hope and created the campus concept, which is the same three tiers, if you will, although there's an additional, well, I'll go over the differences in a minute. I think both are somewhat the same in that they have a very low barrier for emergency shelter for people that really are coming in that are in need of very basic things like food and shelter, but are potentially medical care, but not necessarily interested in taking advantage of other services. What the rescue mission does is it takes that same concept, that low barrier concept that helps provide services for everybody that is experiencing homelessness, but then has another section for those who are participating in programs, who are participating in addiction recovery, who are participating in mental health, who are participating in job training, and quite frankly, their conditions are better than that of those not participating in anything, those simply seeking emergency services. And then there's a third element, which is the transitional housing, which are those people that are participating in job training and in actual in working, but not yet ready to be on their own. And what I think, what I also like about the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission, that it that I mean the one they're doing permanent supportive housing that is actually separate from the campus, but is managed by the rescue mission, the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission. I think we already have permanent supportive housing. What I did fail to mention, and looking at the scope of what is coming on, is that we have skin in the game in terms of the redevelopment of the Ridgeview Academy, which was a 500-bed facility for young males who had an altercation with the criminal justice system. That is no longer used for that purpose. It has a school on it on this campus. It is on East Quebec, just actually outside of the Aurora city limits. It is isolated, which is intentional. It is 500 beds, but it probably will be anywhere from probably 125 if you take the current rooms, because they're not going to put they put 4 young people double bunked into a single room. Those rooms are going to be for individual adults. Then you're going to have classrooms that can be converted into living quarters, and I don't know what that will translate to at this time. So it'd be a minimum of 125, could be all the way up to 200 when all is said and done. For people who have been chronically homeless and who suffer from drug and alcohol issues, that will be along the Fort Lyon model in a very long-term program. I can't call it permanent supportive housing because it's more like it's transitional housing, because basically they're required to be sober and to participate in addiction recovery. And so in looking at the campus, so I just think that what we ought to do on the campus is focus our resources on those that want to change their behavior, those who want to do something affirmative to change their behavior, to participate in addiction recovery and mental health. But like the model in Haven for Hope in San Antonio, that all of the specific services that we really want them co-located on the campus, where people don't have to leave the campus for mental health care. People don't have to leave the campus to participate in addiction recovery. People don't have to leave the campus to participate in job training. It may be a relationship with, because it's at 30, it's raw land to be built on raw land. at 32nd and Chambers, that there could be an arrangement with the Gaylord Hotel in terms of work. And I was just up there meeting with somebody who was formerly homeless for a long period of time, and who eventually was able to kick the meth habit, and after 3 different tries in addiction recovery, kicked the meth habit, and then was able to get employment at the Gaylord Hotel after undergoing a training program, and is doing extremely well. And so people like the Gaylord Hotel, the largest hotel convention, the largest hotel in the state of Colorado, and the massive convention center, would be happy to participate in the program. With this facility, as I'm sure other employers would as well. And so that's the direction that I would like to go, and that's the direction that this resolution puts us in.
Mayor?
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to set some direction. I do have concern because we do have, you mentioned the Ridgeview campus that the mayor, or that the governor talked about, and it was recently in the news again about wraparound recovery center for those, experiencing drug addiction. So I think we have what, 500 to 600 homeless in the city of Aurora from our point in contact count. Wouldn't we be able to, I mean, a lot of those are people that are experiencing drug addiction. Wouldn't we be able to move them to Ridgeview? It's in Arapahoe County. I mean, I don't think it's just.
No. So Ridgeview is actually going to be pretty much open for individuals coming in the Eastern metropolitan area. And so,
I'm sorry, coming into what?
What's that?
Coming into what?
People, actually, it will be for people beyond Aurora, will be the catchment area for Ridgeview.
But we still get to send people. I mean, we're in Arapahoe County.
Will be a state-run facility. It's not, will be an Aurora-run facility.
But as Aurora is part of the state, wouldn't we be able to send our residents there that need?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess my question is, if our population is a certain population and we can send some there, are we looking to scale it? We're not going to have this massive campus. We're looking to scale it down so that we can provide these, the navigation center, the transitional housing, but we're going to use Aurora Mental Health, and we're going to use Ridgeview as resources as well.
That's correct. Well, we're not going to, the city's not going to be running those facilities, Aurora Mental Health is probably going to set its own policies. Ridgeview, or the state will set the policies for Ridgeview. We, as a city, will set the policies for the campus.
Okay, so I have one suggestion to your resolution. If we could add that we would have to have a commitment from a private nonprofit to operate it before we build a campus.
I tell you what, let me work with you on that language.
Okay.
So that and I offer this to any of the members, because this is a very significant issue, that if any of the members want to work with me on edits to the language, I'm more than happy to sit down with them before it goes to the floor on next Monday.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Further questions, comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, I guess first I want to start by addressing the issue of a campus, because my hope was that with these trips that we've taken and the folks that we've spoken with, that we would have come back and tried to identify what is the most cost-effective approach to addressing this issue. Yet we're discussing a campus, which is an exceptionally expensive endeavor. There's a large upfront capital investment, and then ongoing operational costs that are going to need to be covered. And I understand that there's an opportunity to get a grant from the state for a campus, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to suit the needs of what we're experiencing, not just in our community, but in the region, because I can't imagine that they would give us a grant just to serve our own city. And at the end of the day, we need to be looking at the effectiveness of campus programs versus other models. And my takeaway from the Springs is that, and Haven of Hope, or For Hope, is that neither of them are, even remotely as effective as the approach that Houston took, which is also a lot more less costly, so more cost effective overall. And that ties back to the verbiage in your resolution here. I mean, I think the idea of co-locating services to the extent that we need physical space is great. That's a best practice. Emergency supportive services, also a best practice, so that's great. Case management, also a best practice, but I need to know what you mean by navigation center in this language, because I saw Denver talking about a navigation center in a recent presentation to their city council, but they're just rebranding their shelters basically. They're not navigating people into housing out of them. So that doesn't seem like, it's disingenuous from my perspective. Also, I heard you and Councilmember Zvonik, and I think Mayor Pro Tem saying you want the conditions. But we were told, even by folks at Haven, that the conditions are barriers. We're going to serve less people. And I mean, frankly, Bridge House here in Aurora is a great example. They can serve low acuity or high acuity folks, right? Folks who maybe are just down on their luck, but otherwise able-bodied, sound of mind, and help them. And that's great. They play an important role in our continuum here. But if we're going to make an investment, we need to be sure that we can, support most of the people, the vast majority of the people. Or I'll just pull the numbers that Mark gave us from Houston, 95% of the people with what we're doing here, because our residents have asked us to solve this problem. Not to moralize about it, not to make judgments about it, but to solve this problem. And I feel like we're getting way into the weeds here about a campus and all these requirements we want to tack on. And that's going to make anything we do less effective at the end of the day. So we have this great opportunity to get funds from the state, potentially to repurpose or redirect existing federal funding. And maybe even if, things hold out and look okay, repurpose some of our cannabis dollars towards this effort. But most importantly, not just do this on our own. Because no matter if y'all have your heart set on a campus, again, I'm just going to go on the record and say I think that's a terrible idea just from a cost and logistics standpoint. But we can't do this alone and be successful. And that's, I think, something that all three of the places that we went to visit, in one way or another expressed to us. The numbers speak for themselves, especially in San Antonio, in terms of their reduction in their point in time count. They've only experienced a 9% reduction. Houston's experienced a 63% reduction in climbing. So I think we can do a lot better than a campus here. Going back to your resolution, though, I also like the private and philanthropic participation. I think that's not necessary, but great to have. And I would very much welcome that. I would like commitments ahead of time, as Mayor Pro Tem Bergen mentioned, just so that we can ensure this is going to be something that's sustainable. And then a public communication strategy is absolutely critical, because we need to be able to demonstrate to folks that whatever we invest our resources in is actually having a effect, demonstrably. And as we learned in Houston, that was a huge part of their success, was actually being able to physically show change in the community. And not just that, oh, look, we swept a camp from Mississippi to Iliff, that no, those folks are now housed and they're not coming back. Because I think that's ultimately what our residents want to see at the end of the day. So yeah, to kind of put a lid on that, I'm happy to work with you on some of the verbiage here. But it seems to me like you're committed to a campus. I think that's absolutely the wrong way to go. I think that's extremely expensive. If the state wants to help with that, great. My advocacy still remains for the most cost-effective solution here that allows us to address 95% of the population, and that's permanent supportive housing. So, thanks.
Thank you. And let me just say that the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission is mostly privately funded. They are able to raise money to support the program. They receive very little assistance from the city of Colorado Springs. Further comments? Is there objection to moving number 5A forward?
Mayor?
Councilmember McConnell.
I would want to change some of the language first.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me, it will be a campus, so I'm assuming you'll object to that, but I will be willing to sit down with you and work on language whenever possible between now and next month.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I have a immediate question. Why do you want a campus?
Oh, I think I just feel that looking at it's the most effective thing. I think, Houston, I just don't think it's even sustainable in given their budgets. I mean, it's $100 million a year, $10 million for the private sector. And they've been, basically taking, a lot of one-time money, putting it together. And I think when that one-time money runs out, they're going to be in trouble.
And I would agree with that for the record. That's what happened to Salt Lake City. They basically treated homelessness as a one and done kind of issue. We address the population we have today and we're good to go. But we all have to realize, and I think we all know, that our socioeconomic system produces homelessness. So to me, we need a ongoing source of funding and a commitment to a long-term strategy to pick folks up as they fall. So I would agree with that point. However, it is still more cost effective than Haven or the Springs Rescue Mission. Whether you consider philanthropic funding or not, they spend less money and get more out of it. And I think that that's what we need to be, discussing here, especially given the, some of the discussion we had earlier tonight where folks are still trying to find a way to carve $6 million out of our budget. And just the fact that this is still going to require ongoing maintenance, especially as a campus, right? So whether it's a permanent supportive housing program without a centralized campus or a centralized campus, there's still going to need to be ongoing revenues. So from my perspective, it needs to be, how can we generate the most impact for the least amount of money? And I guess we're just at a disagreement that a campus is that solution.
Mayor Zabonik.
Councilmember Zabonik.
Yeah, so to the point that Councilmember kind of just made about Salt Lake, I think the same is true of San Francisco. This is the problem with housing first. When you do housing first for everybody, early on the numbers look great, and then eventually it fails and becomes an abject failure like it is in San Francisco. And I don't want to see us follow that same approach. And as I've said, I think that housing first or permanent supportive housing for a very small segment of the homeless population makes some sense. But the idea that you get more out of it, I guess it depends on what more out of it means. And if more means that you're hiding people in housing, but actually not changing their condition, that they're still addicted and they're not getting mental health treatment that they need to actually have a chance. And I know you mentioned earlier that they talked about self-sufficiency at Haven for Hope. This was from their website. And support them as they move towards self-sufficiency. And that was one of my disappointments. Is I think that the constant pursuit of federal dollars and that were tightly tied to this idea of housing first for everybody, it compromised a program that was actually doing better for the people experiencing homelessness and moving them towards a path of self-sufficiency. But in order to pull down federal dollars, they made compromises, which I think has set them back. But again, I think Houston's artificial what appears to be success in Houston is it's a veneer. It's not real, and you see it in places like Salt Lake, as you pointed out, and San Francisco. And so I think that this idea of having because the campus isn't all. The mayor laid out at the beginning of his presentation, right? There's a lot of other components to our comprehensive homeless strategy that we would already have in place, including permanent supportive housing, some new coming online. You have the Ridgeview Academy. There are different pieces that are going to be available to make part of this. But for the emergency shelter, having a campus where people could go initially and getting them, I think the Navigation Center, to answer your question, and I don't want to answer for the mayor, but I think the Navigation Center, what I would hope to see as a part of that is that case management, somebody who's going to help meet that individual where they are and help them to identify the right types of treatment and services that they need in order to move on a path towards self-sufficiency. And for one individual, that might be a 3-month journey, and others, it might be 18 months or 2 years. But the case management needs to be somebody who we could ask at any point in time, are we moving people? Are we transforming their lives? Because I don't think it's our economic system that produces homelessness. I think it's lenient drug laws that produce more homelessness. Because and the lack of access to mental health support that leads to homelessness. Our economic system has led to more prosperity than any other economic system in the history of the world. So I don't believe that's it at all.
Please, please. So like to say that, okay, go ahead, Councilmember Zabala, please finish.
Yeah, and so I would just say this. I support that this resolution is moving forward. I know that there are going to be things that we have to work out, but I think that having permanent supportive housing for all is not the right solution. And I think having some conditions and incentives baked into whatever this looks like is important.
Let me say, a navigation center will be a part of the campus because they're essentially screening the population that comes in for emergency services to provide case management, to essentially be a conduit to get them the services they need to move forward and eventually become self-sufficient. And I know that we have different definitions, perhaps, of what is self-sufficient, but again, I think we ought to provide emergency services for everybody. Concentrate our resources on those who affirmatively want to change their behavior. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And when we're talking about a nonprofit, we are talking about a nonprofit operating it. It's not going to be city is not going to operate a homeless campus, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I think that I would like to work with you on that. Just make sure we have that language in there, but also, we should be looking for philanthropists to help us fund this because we should not put the burden on the backs of our taxpayers, that have other needs for services in our city. We certainly have plenty of those. So I think, there's plenty of organizations out there that will be willing to partner with us as long as we have a good model that will have good outcomes.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I would just, hope that my colleagues would look at the actual evidence for outcomes before committing to a very costly campus with physical infrastructure. It's going to require upfront capital and ongoing maintenance. And just, come on, y'all, do the financially responsible thing. You can have all the credit for it, seriously, but it's the right thing to do for our city. I am currently hiding in a house right now, Councilmember Zvonek, as are you. There are folks who are housed that have substance abuse issues. They manage to keep their housing because they have the means to. There are more people on the street who develop substance abuse issues as a way to cope with their horrible conditions and the trauma that they experience as a result of becoming homeless. And then that we compound on them through strategies like camping bans. So I don't buy it. The evidence doesn't bear out what you feel. And I understand that you might feel that deeply because your lived experience is different. But our role as policymakers is not to rely on our feelings, is to look at the evidence. And if we are going to go down the route of a campus, I just feel that we are setting our city up for mid to long-term failure and a sink and a very, very frustrated population that was promised a solution, just as they were with the camping ban to begin with, that did not deliver results. So
let me speak to the evidence for a minute. On the Houston, when I went there, what I was so disappointed with was their inability, even though they said they had case managers and they provided 24 months for each individual and free housing with wraparound services and no requirements, and that's part of the Housing First model. But when I asked them, could you share with us as a group, question them, give us a snapshot of where people are 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, who's participating in addiction recovery, who's participating in mental health, who's participating in job training, who's working. They couldn't provide it, wouldn't provide it. And I think so, the evidence is a little fuzzy. I was real concerned about that, very disappointed that they couldn't provide that information, because if they say they have case managers working with the participants in their Housing First program, it was disappointing that they wouldn't share that data. But what I was impressed with the program was the extraordinary ability for governments, for nonprofits to all work together for a common purpose. I will say that was extremely impressive. And and I credit them for that. Further questions or comments? Councilmember Sundberg.
One thing I've read about Housing First and a danger in it is the increased mortality rate, well, where a fatality rate where you're putting someone in a home without really addressing that serious addiction problem. Was that addressed in Houston at all? And to the mayor's point, were there some success stories there of recovery and successful independence in life down the road for these folks?
Councilmember McConnell.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So your last question, Councilmember Sundberg. Yes, there are success stories, and I think those were highlighted in the New York Times coverage of their model. During our visit there, as you know, we were only there for about 36 hours, and we did not have a chance to meet with the service providers, to the mayor's point, and ask them for that data. The folks who were in that room with us were basically the folks who focus on, getting folks housed first and foremost. And to kind of answer or maybe rebuff a little bit your point, Mayor, the bottom line is that 90% of the folks who go through Houston's program after 2 years are still housed. The number of them that participate in job placement, job training, detox, rehab, etc., we don't know those numbers because they didn't have the folks there that could provide that with us. Maybe you can reach out to Mark and get those statistics. But the bottom line for me is that their folks are still housed after 2 years. That's a huge milestone. That's 90% of that population that is actually, off the streets, hopefully permanently. And to Councilmember Sundberg, your point about mortality, I think I saw that study that came out of Denver that showed a 1% delta between folks who are out on the street and folks who get into permanent supportive housing. That is such a minuscule amount that and that's the only study of that sort that has been done to the best of my knowledge, that I would want to frankly see more comparables from other jurisdictions to see if that bears out. And the fact of the matter is that those folks, how to delicately put this, you cannot save everybody, but at least they didn't die of exposure. So.
Well, let me just say that the providers were in with it, and they pushed back pretty hard when I asked that question, and so it made it very clear that that information was not going to be made available. There's no tracking of the individuals once they leave the program, other than there's the BHMS, I'm trying to remember the acronym, that when people provide for services and enter in their information, that was the only tracking that was done. It was not, did somebody move to another area and become homeless? Who went to work? Whatever. That in terms of the in terms of the whole population that was participating in the program, that there was only that one tracking. Now, those numbers were impressive in that, but I would like to have seen the whole picture, and I think that was disappointing that it wasn't there. But I'm willing to work with every member in terms of seeing where we can compromise on this. Obviously, we are headed towards a campus, and that's what the state is prepared to fund, and the county is prepared to support. At least Arapahoe County. I think we haven't gone to Adams County yet. But again, I'll be happy to sit down with any member between now and Monday night, next Monday night. Further discussion. Seeing none, those in support, if you could indicate.
Zavonic.
Mayor's in support.
Bergen.
Sundberg.
Lawson.
I think we're missing a couple.
Did you get Zavonic? I don't know if you heard me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, so there's 5 that are risen. I think, is Jurenski still on?
Don't. Well.
We can't hear her.
Yeah, she's on. She's on.
Councilmember Jurenski?
We can't hear you.
Maybe you could type it in the chat.
Well, I will move it on. I will use my discretion, as any member of council could, decide to move it forward. And so it will be up next Monday night, but I will join with everyone who wants to in terms of going over specific points and seeing if we should compromise. Um, seeing no further business before the city council, the study session is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.